The Book of HUGS. Eduardo Galeano. The Book of HUGS. The world. A man from the town of Negua, on the Colombian coast, was able to ascend to heaven. On the way back, he counted. He says he contemplated human life from up there. And he said we are a sea of little fires. The world is that, revealed or dash. Lots of people, a sea of fireworks. Each person shines with his own light among all the others. There are no two equal fires. There are big fires and small fires and fires of all colors. There are serene fire people, who do not even notice the wind, and crazy fire people, who fill the air with sparks. Some fires, silly fires, neither ignite nor burn, but others burn life so greedily that one cannot look at them without blinking, and whoever approaches lights up. The origin of the world. A few years ago the war in Spain was over and the cross and the sword reigned over the ruins of the Republic. One of the losers, an anarchist worker, recently released from prison, was looking for work. In vain she churned heaven and earth. There was no work for a red. They all pouted at him, shrugged their shoulders or turned their backs on him. Nobody understood him, nobody listened to him. Wine was the only friend he had left. At night, faced with empty plates, he silently suffers the reproaches of his devout wife, a woman who attends daily mass, while her son, a little boy, recites his catechism to him. A long time later, Josep Verdura, the son of this accursed worker, told me about it. He told me about it in Barcelona, when I arrived in exile. He told me, he was a desperate child who wanted to save his father from eternal damnation, and the very atheist, the very stubborn, didn't understand the reasons. But Dad, Joseph told him crying dash. If God does not exist, who created the world? Idiot, said the worker, discouraged, almost secretly dash. Beast. The world was made by us, the builders. The function of art/1. Diego did not know the sea. His father, Santiago Covidiof, took him to discover it. They traveled south. She, the sea, was beyond the high dunes, waiting. When the boy and his father finally reached these sandy peaks, after a long walk, the sea exploded before their eyes. And the vastness of the sea was so great, and so bright, that the boy was speechless with beauty. And when he finally managed to speak, trembling, stammering, he asked his father, "Help me to look." Grapes and wine. A man from the vineyards spoke, in agony, in Marcela's ear. Before dying, he revealed his secret to her. Grapes, he murmured, are made of wine. Marcela Pura Silva told me about it, and I thought, if the grape is made of wine, maybe we are the words that say what we are. The passion to say/1. Marcela was in the snows of the north. In Oslo, one evening, he meets a woman who sings and tells stories. Between song and song, this woman tells good stories, and she tells them while looking at little pieces of paper, like someone who reads luck upside down. This woman from Oslo wears a huge skirt full of pockets. From his pockets he takes out papers, one by one, and in each paper there is a good story to tell, a story of foundation, and in each story there are people who want to live again through art of witchcraft. And so she continues to resuscitate the forgotten and the dead, and from the bottom of the skirt germinate the promenades and the loves of the human beast, this living creature, they say. The passion to say/2. Whether a man or a woman is pregnant with more than one person. People come out of its pores. This is how the Indians of New Mexico show it in clay figures. The narrator, the one who recounts the collective memory, comes entirely from the lower classes. The House of Words. The House of Words, dreamed Helena Villagra, the poets came. The words, preserved in old glass jars, awaited the poets and offered themselves to them. Mad with the desire to be chosen, they begged the poets to look at them, to smell them, to touch them, to lick them. Poets opened the jars, tested the words with their fingers, then smacked their lips or wrinkled their noses. Poets were looking for words they didn't know, and they were also looking for words they knew and had lost. In the house of words, there was a color table. The colors were offered in large fountains and each poet used the color he needed, lemon yellow or sun yellow, sea blue or smoke blue, sealing wax red, blood red, wine red. The function of the reader/1. When Lucia Pelez was very young, she secretly read a novel. She read it little by little, night after night, hiding it under her pillow. She had stolen it from the library in the cedars of the EAC where the uncle kept his favorite books. Lucia walked a lot, after that, over the years. In search of ghosts, he walked along the cliffs above the Antioque River and, in search of people, he walked the streets of violent cities. Lucia walked a lot, and throughout her journey she was always accompanied by the echoes of those distant voices that she had heard, with her eyes, in her childhood. Lucia has not proofread this book. I wouldn't recognize him anymore. It's grown so much inside that now it's someone else, now it's yours. The role of the reader/2. It was half a century after Cesar Vallejo's death, and there were celebrations. In Spain, Julio Vélez organized conferences, seminars, editions, and an exhibition that offered images of the poet, his land, his time and his people. But at that time Julio Vélez met José Manuel Castañón, and then all homage was eclipsed. José Manuel Castañón had been a captain during the Spanish Civil War. Fighting for Franco, he had lost a hand and won a few medals. One night, shortly after the war, the captain accidentally discovers a forbidden book. He leaned over, read a verse, read 2 verses, and couldn't tear himself away. Captain Castañón, hero of the victorious army, spent the whole night awake, trapped, reading and rereading Cesar Vallejo, poet of the vanquished. And at dawn that night he resigned from the army and refused to collect another peseta from the Franco government. Later, they put him in prison, and went into exile. Celebration of the human voice/1. The Shuar Indians, the so-called Jibaros, cut off the heads of the vanquished. They cut it and reduce it, until it fits in a fist, so that the vanquished does not rise again. But the vanquished is not completely vanquished until his mouth is closed. That's why they sew his lips together with a fiber that never rots. Celebration of the human voice/2. Their hands were bound, or handcuffed, and yet their fingers danced, flew, drew words. The prisoners were hooded, but leaning down, they could see something, a little, below. Although it was forbidden to speak, they conversed with their hands. Pinio Ungerfeld taught me the finger alphabet, which he learned in prison without a teacher. Some of us had bad handwriting, he told me. Others were calligraphers. The Uruguayan dictatorship wanted everyone to be one, everyone to be nobody. In prisons and barracks, and throughout the country, communication was a crime. Some prisoners have spent more than 10 years buried in solitary coffin-sized dungeons, hearing no voices other than the clanking of bars or the tread of boots in the hallways. Fernandez Huidobro and Mauricio Rosenkopf, condemned to this solitude, were saved because they were able to talk to each other, tapping, through the wall. This is how dreams and memories, loves and heartbreaks were told. They argued, they hugged, they fought, they shared certainties and beauties and also shared doubts and guilt and questions of those who have no answer. When it is true, when it arises from the need to say, nothing stops the human voice. If they refuse her mouth, she speaks through her hands, or her eyes, or her pores, or wherever. Because all of us, have something to say to others, something that deserves to be celebrated or forgiven by others. Definition of art. Portinari is not there, said Portinari. For a moment he stuck his nose out, slammed the door and disappeared. It was the 1930s, the red hunting years in Brazil, and Portinari had gone into exile in Montevideo. Ivan Cronald was not from those years, nor from that place, but much later he peeked through the little holes in the curtain of time and told me what he had seen. Candido Portinari paints from morning to evening, and at night too. Portinari is here, he said. At that time, the communist intellectuals of Uruguay were going to take a stand against socialist realism and seek the opinion of the prestigious comrade. We know that you are not here, Professor, they told him and begged him. But, wouldn't you give us a moment? One moment. And they raised the issue with him. I don't know, Portinari said. And say. The only thing I know is this, art is art, or it's crap. The language of art. El Chinolope sold newspapers and shined shoes in Havana. To get out of poverty, he went to New York. There, someone gave him an old camera. Chinolope had never held a camera in her hands, but they told her it was easy. You look here and press there. And he took to the streets. And shortly after he walked, he heard gunshots and walked into a barber shop and raised the camera and looked here and pressed there. In the barber shop, shaving mobster Joe Anastasiel had been shot, and it was the first picture of Chinolope's professional life. They paid him a fortune. This photo was a feat. Chinolope had succeeded in photographing death. Death was there, not in the dead, nor in the matador. Death was in the face of the barber who saw her. The border of art. It was the longest battle of any fought in Tuzcatlan or any other region of El Salvador. It started at midnight, when the first grenades fell from the hill, and it lasted all night and until the afternoon of the following day. The army declared Chinchorro to be impregnable. 4 times the guerrillas had attacked it and 4 times they had failed. The 5th time, when the white flag was hoisted on the command mast, the shots in the air began the rejoicing. Julio Ama, who fought and photographed the war, walked the streets. He had his rifle in his hand and the camera, also loaded and ready to fire, hanging from his neck. Julio walked the dusty streets, looking for the twin brothers. These twins were the only survivors of a village destroyed by the army. They were 16 years old. They liked to fight alongside Julio, and between the wars he taught them to read and photograph. In the whirlwind of this battle, Julio had lost the twins, and now he saw them neither among the living nor among the dead. He crossed the park. At the corner of the church, he turned into an alley. And then, finally, he found them. One of the twins was sitting on the floor, his back against a wall. On his knees lay the other, bathed in blood, and at the feet, in a cross, were the 2 guns. Julio approached, maybe he said something. The living twin said nothing, didn't move, he was there, but he wasn't. His staring eyes stared, lost somewhere, nowhere, and in that tearless face was all the war and all the pain. Julio left his rifle on the ground and grabbed the camera. He shot the film, calculated the light and distance in a jiffy and brought the image into focus. The brothers were in the center of the crosshairs, motionless, perfectly cut against the wall recently bitten by the bullets. Julio was going to take the picture of his life, but the finger wouldn't. Julio tried again, and the finger wouldn't. Then he lowered the camera, without pressing the shutter button, and quietly retired. The camera, a Minolta, died in another battle, drowned in the rain. A year later the art show /2. Pastor Miguel Brun told me that a few years ago he was with the Paraguayan Chaco Indians. He was part of an evangelistic mission. The missionaries visited a cacique who had the prestige of being very wise. The cacique, a fat man, motionless and silent, listened without batting an eyelid to the religious propaganda that was read to him in the language of the Indians. When the reading ended, the missionaries waited. The tribal leader took his time. Later, he said, "It itches. And it scratches a lot, and very well. And condemned. But scratch where it doesn't itch." Prophecy /1. In Peru, a magician covered me in red roses and then read my luck. The magician told me, "Within 1 month, you will receive a distinction." I laughed. I laughed at the infinite kindness of this unknown woman, who gave me flowers and omens of success, and I laughed at the word distinction, which has something funny about it, and because a vice neighborhood friend came to my mind, who he was very rude but precise, and he used to say, condemning, lifting a finger, in the short or long term, writers make burgers. So I laughed, and the magician laughed at my laughter. A month later, exactly a month later, I received a telegram in Montevideo. In Chile, said the telegram, I had received a distinction. It was the José Carrasco Prize. Celebration of the Human Voice /3. José Carrasco was a journalist for Analysis magazine. One morning in the spring of 1986, he was taken from his home. A few hours earlier, the attack against General Augusto Pinochet had taken place. And a few days before, the dictator had said, "We have some gentlemen on the feed." At the foot of a wall, on the banks of Santiago, he received 14 bullets in the head. It was dawn and no one showed up. The body was there, lying, until noon. The neighbors never washed off the blood. The place became a sanctuary for the poor, always covered in candles and flowers, and José Carrasco became a miraculous soul. On the wall, bitten by the shots, can be read the thanks for the favors received. At the beginning of 1988, I traveled to Chile. He hadn't been there for 15 years. I was received at the airport by Juan Pablo Cardenas, the director of Analysis. Sentenced for grievances against the power, Cardenas slept in prison. Every night, at 10 o'clock, he went into prison and came out with the sun. Chronicle of the City of Santiago. Santiago of Chile shows, like other cities of Latin America, a resplendent image. For less than $1 a day, legions of workers wax his mask. In high-rise neighborhoods, you live like Miami, you live in Miami, life is Miamized, plastic clothes, plastic food, plastic people, while videos and computers become the perfect words pass of happiness. But these Chileans are less and less numerous, and the other Chileans, the sub-Chileans, are more and more so. The economy speaks ill of them, the police hunt them, and the culture denies them. Some become beggars. Bypassing the bans, they manage to appear under red light in any portal. There are beggars of all sizes, of all colors, whole and mangled, sincere and fake, some in utter despair, walking on the verge of madness, and others sporting twisted faces and trembling hands from the labor of many rehearsals. Admirable professionals, true artists to ask well. In the midst of the military dictatorship, the best of the Chilean beggars was the one who moved people by saying, "I'm a civilian." Neruda/1. I was in Isla Negra, in the house which is, that of Pablo Neruda. Entry was prohibited. A wooden palisade surrounded the house. There, people had recorded their messages to the poet. Not a piece of wood had been left uncovered. Everyone spoke to him as if he were alive. With pencils or fingernails, each had found her own way of saying, "Thank you." I also found, without words, my way. And I entered without entering. And in silence we talked of wines, the poet and I, talking quietly of seas and loves and of some infallible potion against baldness. We shared prawn pilpil and a prodigious crab cake and other wonders of those which delight the soul and the belly, which are, as he well knows, two names for the same thing. Several times we raised our glasses of good wine, and a salty wind hit us in the face, and it was all a ceremony of cursed dictatorship, that black spear stuck in his side, that big whore pain, and it was all also a ceremony of the celebration of life, beautiful and ephemeral like the flowered altars and the loves that pass. Neruda/2. It happened in La Sebastiana, another Neruda house, leaning against the mountain, on the bay of Valparaiso. The house was securely locked, with a lock and a padlock and under 7 keys, inhabited by no one, for a long time. The military had already usurped power, blood had already flowed in the streets, Neruda had already died of cancer or heartbreak. Then strange noises, inside the closed house, attracted the attention of the neighbors. Someone leaned out of a high window and saw the gleaming eyes and attacking claws of an inexplicable eagle. The eagle couldn't be there, he couldn't be in, he had nowhere to go, but he was inside, and inside it beat violently. Prophecy/2. Helena dreamed of those who had kept the fire burning. The old women, the very poor old ones, had kept it in the kitchens of the suburbs, and to offer it, all they had to do was blow gently on the palm of their hand. Fantastic celebration. He went to the entrance to the town of Ollantaytambo, near Cuzco. I had detached myself from a group of tourists and was alone, gazing at the stone ruins from a distance when a puny, ragged local boy approached me to ask me to give him a pen. I couldn't give him the pen I had, because he used it for whatever boring notes, but I offered to draw a little pig in his hand. Suddenly the word spread. From the outset I found myself surrounded by a swarm of children who demanded, at the top of their voices, that I draw thumbtacks on their little hands cracked by the earth and the cold, skins, burnt leather. There were those who wanted a condor and who a snake, others preferred parrots or owls, and there were those who asked for a ghost or a dragon. And then, in the midst of this commotion, a homeless man who stood no more than a meter above the ground, showed me a clock drawn in black ink on his wrist. It was sent to me by an uncle of mine, who lives in Lima, he said. How are you? Asked. It's a bit late, he admitted. Kid's art. She was sitting in a high chair, in front of a bowl of soup that rose to her eyes. His nose was wrinkled and his teeth clenched and his arms crossed. The mother asked for help. Tell him a story, Juanilio, he asked. Tell him, you who are a writer. And Juanilo Jorge Cardoso, brandishing a spoonful of soup, began his story. Once upon a time there was a little bird that didn't want to eat food. The little bird had a closed beak, very closed, and the mother said, you will remain a dwarf, little bird, if you do not eat the little food. But the bowtie didn't listen to the mom and didn't open her beak. And then the girl interrupted him. What a shitty bowtie, he said. Children's art. Mario Montenegro sings the stories told to him by his children. He is sitting on the ground, with his guitar, surrounded by a circle of children, and these children or rabbits tell him the story of the 70 rabbits who climbed on top of each other in order to be able to kiss the giraffe, or they tell him the story of the blue rabbit who was alone in the middle of the sky. A star took the blue rabbit for a walk in the sky, and they visited the moon, which is a big white round country full of holes, and they went spinning in space, and they jumped on the cotton clouds. Then the star got tired and returned to the land of stars, and the rabbit returned to the land of rabbits, and there he ate corn and shit and fell asleep and dreamed he was a blue rabbit who was alone in the middle of the sky. Helen's dreams. That night the dreams piled up, wanting to be dreamed, but Helena couldn't dream them all, there was no way. One of the dreams, unknown, was recommended. Dream me, it suits you. Dream me, you'll like it. They lined up a few new dreams, never dreamed, but Helena recognized the silly dream, which always came back, that heavy, and other comic or dark dreams that were familiar to her from her nights of flight. Journey to Dreamland. Helena went, in a horse cart, to the land where dreams are dreamed. Next to him, also sitting on the box, was the dog Peepa Lumpen. Peepa was carrying a chicken under her arm that was going to work in her dream. Helena brought a huge trunk full of masks and colorful cloths. The road was very crowded. They all walked to Dreamland, and they heard a lot and made a lot of noise repeating the dreams they were going to dream, so Peepa went grumbling, because they wouldn't let her concentrate properly. The Land of Dreams. It was a huge outdoor camp. Singing lettuces and bright peppers sprang from the wizard's galleys, and everywhere there were people offering dreams in exchange. There were those who wanted to exchange a dream of travel for a dream of love, and there were those who offered a dream to laugh in exchange for a dream to cry a very tasty cry. A man was out there looking for the pieces of his dream, ruined because of someone who had taken it away. The man was picking up the pieces and sticking them together and making a colorful banner out of them. The dream carrier brought water to those who were thirsty while they slept. He carried the water on his back, in a vase, and roasted it in tall glasses. On a tower there was a woman, in a white tunic, combing her hair which reached to her feet. The comb emitted dreams, with all its characters. The dreams came out of the hair and flew away. The forgotten dreams. Helena dreamed that she had left her forgotten dreams on an island. Claribel Alegria collected the dreams, tied them with a ribbon and kept them well guarded. But the children of the house discovered the hiding place and wanted to put on Helena's dreams, and Claribel, angry, said to them, "It's not touched." So Claribel called Helena on the phone and asked her, "What do I do with your dreams?" The farewell of dreams. Dreams went on a journey. Helena was going to the station. From the platform, he said goodbye to them with a handkerchief. Celebration of reality. If Darnazo Murua's aunt had told Garcia Marquez her story, perhaps the chronicle of a foretold death would have had a different ending. Susana Contreras, that's the name of Darnazo's aunt, in her good times had the most incendiary ass of all seen on fire in the town of Escuinapa and in all parts of the Gulf of California. Many years ago, Susana married one of the many suitors who succumbed to her movements. On the wedding night, the husband discovered that she was not a virgin. Then he got rid of the fiery Suzanne as if she were carrying the plague, slammed the door and left forever. The villain went drinking in the canteens, where his party guests were following the party. Embracing his buddies, he began to mutter grudges and utter threats, but no one took his cruel torment seriously. They listened to him sympathetically, while he majestically swallowed the tears that welled up, but then they told him that chocolate for the news, that of course Susanna was not a virgin, that the whole town knew it except him, and that after all, it was a detail that didn't matter in the slightest, and don't be an asshole, man, you only live once. He insisted, and instead of gestures of solidarity, he received yawns. And so the night advanced, jerkily, in a sad hollow, more and more solitary, towards dawn. One after another, the guests went to bed. Dawn found the offended man sitting in the street, completely alone and tired enough of complaining so much without anyone noticing. The man was already bored with his own tragedy, and the first light extinguished his desire to suffer and seek revenge. In the middle of the morning he took a good bath and drank a very hot coffee, and at noon he returned, repentant, to the arms of the disavowed. He backed up, at a grand pace, from the other end of the main street. He carried a huge bouquet of roses, and he led a long procession of friends, relatives, and the general public. The serenade orchestra closed the march. The orchestra rang at full speed, playing for Susanna, as a remedy, La Negra Consensida and Vereda Tropical. With these little songs, some time ago, he had declared himself to her. Art and Reality /1. Bernardo Berry was going to film The Tale of the Angel, by Garcia Marquez, and he took me to see the sets. On the Cuban coast, Fernando had founded a small cardboard town and filled it with chickens, giant crabs, and actors. He was going to play the main role, the role of the featherless angel who falls to the ground and locks himself in a chicken coop. Marshall, a fisherman from there, had been solemnly appointed mayor of this cinematographic city. After the solemn welcome, Marshall accompanied us. Fernando wanted to show me a masterpiece of artificial aging, a dilapidated, leprous cage, bitten with rust and old filth, which was to be the angel's prison, after his escape from the henhouse. But instead of this rickety messed up by the specialists, we found a clean, well-planted cage, with its bars perfectly aligned and freshly painted gold. Marshall swelled with pride when he showed us this beauty. Fernando, half dazed, half furious, eats it almost raw. "What is it, Marshall, what is it?" Marshall swallowed saliva, blushed, lowered his head and scratched his stomach. Then he confessed. I couldn't afford it. I couldn't allow a good man like you to be put in this filthy cage. Art and reality /2. Rocklio Zepeda played the role of Pancho Villa in Mexico Insurgent, Paul Leduc's film, and he did it so well that since then there are those who believe that Heraclio Zepeda is the name that Pancho Villa uses to work at the movie theater. They were shooting this movie, in any small town, and people participated in everything that happened, in a very natural way, without the director having an art or a role. It had been half a century since Pancho Villa had died, but no one was surprised when he got there. One night, after an intense day of work, some women gathered in front of the house where Heraclio was sleeping and asked him to intercede for the prisoners. The next morning, very early, he went to talk to the mayor. General Villa had to come, for justice to be done, people commented. Reality is crazy. Tell me something, tell me if Marxism forbids eating glass. I want to know. It was in the mid-1970s, in eastern Cuba. The man was there, standing at the door, waiting. I apologize. I told him that I understood little Marxism, just a little, and that it was better to consult a specialist in Havana. They already took me to Havana, he told me, the doctors saw me there. And the commander saw me. Fidel asked me, hey, won't it be your ignorance? For having eaten glass, they had withdrawn his communist youth card. Here in Baracoa, they did the process for me. Trijimo Suarez was an exemplary militiaman, an advanced tailor and an avant-garde worker, one of those who work 20 hours and are paid 8, always the first to return the cane or to shoot, but he had a passion for glass. It's not a vice, he explained to me. It is the necessity. When Trijimo was mobilized for the harvest or the war, his mother filled his backpack with food, she put empty bottles in it for lunch and dinner, and disused luminous tubes for desserts. I also put in some burned-out lamps for snacks. Trijimo took me to his home in the Camilo Cienfuegos neighborhood of Baracoa. While we were talking, I drank coffee and he ate lamps. After he was done with the glass, he greedily vacuumed the filaments. The glass is calling me. I love glass as I love revolution. Trigimus claimed that there was no shadow in his past. He had never eaten someone else's drink, except once, only once, when he was very hungry and had devoured a colleague's drink. Chronicle of the City of Havana. The parents had fled north. At that time, the revolution and he were newborns. A quarter of a century later, Nelson Valdez travels from Los Angeles to Havana to discover his country. Every noon, Nelson took the bus 68, in front of the hotel door, and went to read books on Cuba. He spends the afternoons reading in the Jose Marti Library, until nightfall. That noon, bus 68 came to a sudden stop at an intersection. There were shouts of protest, due to the tremendous jolt, until the passengers saw the reason for the sudden stop, a very elegant woman, who had crossed the street. "Excuse me, gentlemen," the 68 bus driver said, and got off. Afterwards, all the passengers cheered and wished him good luck. The driver walked in tanning, without hurrying, and the passengers saw him approach the very cute, who was in the corner, leaning against the wall, licking an ice cream. From the 68 bus, passengers followed the back and forth of this little tongue kissing the ice as the driver talked and talked without answering, until she burst out laughing and gave him a look. The driver gave him a thumbs up and all the passengers gave him a standing ovation. But when the driver entered the glacier, it caused general unease. And when after a while he came out with an ice cream in each hand, panic spread among the masses. They honked at him. Someone stood on the horn with soul and life, and the horn sounded like a burglar alarm or a fire siren, but the driver, deaf, as of nothing, was still attached to the very tasty. Then, from the back seats of the 68 bus, a woman who looked like a big cannonball and had the face of the commander, came forward. Without saying a word, he settled into the driver's seat and started the engine. Bus 68 continued on its way, stopping at its usual stops, until the woman reached her own stop and got off. Another passenger took his place, for a long time, from stop to stop, then another, and yet another, and so bus 68 continued to the end. Nelson Valdez was the last to fall. He had forgotten the library? Diplomacy in Latin America. What is that? Asked the tourists. Balmaceda smiled apologetically and shook his head. Like everyone else, he wore garlands of flowers around his neck, sunglasses, and a shirt with palm trees, but he was drenched in sweat from a very heavy package. He seemed condemned to a perpetual charge. He had tried to leave the huge package in the toilets of a hotel in Manila and at the customs counter in Papeete. He had tried to throw him overboard and had tried to forget him in various green places on the islands of the Tahiti archipelago. But there was always someone who caught up with him running. Sir, you left something. This sad story began when dictator Marcos invited dictator Pinochet to visit the Philippines. Then the Chilean chancellery sent a bronze bust of General O'Higgins from Santiago to Manila. Pinochet was going to inaugurate this effigy of the national hero in a central square in the city. But Marcos, frightened by the fury of his family, suddenly rescinded the invitation. Pinochet had to return to Chile without disembarking. Then, the official Balmaceda received categorical instructions at the Chilean embassy in Manila. By telephone, they ordered him from Santiago. Enough paperwork. Get rid of that bust any way you can. If she goes back to Chile with him, she loses her job. Chronicle of the City of Quito. In demonstrations on the left, he parades in the lead. He usually attends cultural events, although they annoy him, as he knows that afterwards there is a party. He likes rum, no ice or water, but let it be Cuban. Obey traffic lights. Walk Quito from end to end, to the right and back, visiting friends and foes. On the climbs, he prefers the bus, and sneaks in without paying a ticket. Some drivers scold him. When he gets off, they yell at him, "One-eyed shit." His name is Choco and he is a troublemaker and a sweetheart. Fight up to 4 at a time, and on full moon nights he escapes to find girlfriends. Then he recounts, excited, the crazy adventures he has just experienced. Mishi doesn't understand the details, even though she understands the general meaning. Once, years ago, they took him from Quito. The food was not enough and they decided to leave him in the distant city where he was born. But it came back. After a month, he came back. He arrived at the door of his house and lay there, without the strength to celebrate by wagging his tail, or to announce it by barking. He had crossed many mountains and avenues and arrived at the last, a wreck, his bones exposed, his skin stained with dried blood. Since then, he hates hats, uniforms, and motorcycles. The state in Latin America. It's been years since Colonel Amen told me that. It turns out that a soldier was ordered to change barracks. For a year they sent him to another destination, to a barracks on the border, because the superior government of Uruguay had contracted one of its periodic war fevers against smuggling. On leaving, the soldier left his wife and other belongings with his best friend to keep in sight. After a year, he came back. And he found that his best friend, also a soldier, did not want to give him the wife. There was no problem returning the other things, but the woman, no. The dispute was about to be resolved by the verdict of the knife, in a Creole duel, when Colonel Amen stopped his hand. Let them explain themselves, he demanded. This woman is mine, said the absent one. From him. It will have been. But it's not anymore, said the other. Reasons, said the colonel. I want reasons. And the usurper reasoned. But colonel, how am I going to return it? With what the poor have suffered? If you saw how that animal treated you. He treated you, colonel. As if it came from the state. Bureaucracy /1. During the military dictatorship, In mid-1973, a Uruguayan political prisoner, Juan José Nauecht, received a 5-day sentence, 5 days without visit or recreation, 5 days without anything, for violating the rules. From the point of view of the captain who applied the penalty, the regulations left no doubt. The regulations made it clear that prisoners had to walk in single file with both hands behind their backs. Nauecht had been punished for putting a single hand behind his back. Nauecht was one-armed. He had been incarcerated twice. First his arm fell off. After the arm fell in Montevideo. Nauecht was running away at full speed when the policeman who was pursuing him managed to punch him and shouted, "Get arrested," and he was holding his arm in his hand. The rest of Nauecht fell a year and a half later, at Paysandú. In prison, Nauecht wanted to recover his lost arm. "Make a request," they told him. He explained that he didn't have a pencil. "Make a request for a pencil," they told him. Then he had a pencil, but he had no paper. "Apply for paper," they told him. When he finally had a pencil and paper, he asked for an arm. In time, they responded. "No. You couldn't, the arm was in another folder." He had been prosecuted by military justice. On the arm, civil justice. Bureaucracy/2. Tito Sclavo was able to see and transcribe some official reports from the prison called Libertad, in the years of the Uruguayan dictatorship. These are acts of punishment. Prisoners who have committed the crime of drawing birds, or couples, or pregnant women, or who have been caught using a flour towel, are sentenced to solitary confinement. A prisoner, whose head was, like all, shaved to the ground, was punished for entering the mess hall disheveled. Another, for sticking his head under the door, when there was a millimeter of light under the door. There was a solitary cell for a prisoner who claimed to be acquainted with a war dog and for another who insulted a dog member of the armed forces. Another was penalized for barking like a dog for no good reason. Bureaucracy/3. Sixto Martinez performed his military service in a barracks in Seville. In the middle of the courtyard of this barracks, there was a small bench. Beside the bench a soldier stood guard. No one knew why the guard bench was created. The watch was made because it was made, night and day, every night, every day, and from generation to generation the officers transmitted the order and the soldiers obeyed it. Nobody ever doubted, nobody ever asked. If it was done that way, and it always had been, it would be for a reason. And it stayed that way until someone, I don't know which general or colonel, wanted to know the original order. The files had to be carefully searched. And after looking further, it is known. 31 years, 2 months, and 4 days ago, an officer had ordered a guard to be installed next to the bench that had just been painted, so that no one would think of sitting on the fresh paint. Occurred/1. In Paysandú's kitchen, Melado Idaria recounts events. The events happened once, or almost happened, or never happened, but the good thing about them is that they happen every time they are told. This is the sad event of the little catfish of Arroyo Negro. He had barbed mustaches, crossed eyes, and bug eyes. Melado had never seen such an ugly fish. The catfish was hot on his heels from the bank of the creek, and Melado couldn't scare him away. When he reached the houses, with the catfish as a shadow, he had already resigned himself. Over time, he grew attached to her. El Melado had never had a legless friend. Since dawn, the catfish accompanied him to milk and go around the fields. At sunset, they drank mate together, and the catfish listened to his confidences. The dogs, jealous, looked at him with resentment, the cook, with bad intentions. El Melado thought of giving it a name, having a way of calling it and enforcing it, but he did not know a name for a fish, and naming it Sinforoso or Hermenegildo could not please God. He didn't take his eyes off her. Catfish had a notorious tendency to get into mischief. He takes advantage of any slippage and goes off to frighten the hens or provoke the dogs. Hold on, Melado told him. One very hot morning, while lizards with umbrellas were walking around and little catfish were fanning themselves at full speed with their fins, El Mulatto had the fatal idea. "Let's go bathe in the stream," he suggested. And they went there. The catfish drowned. It happened /2. In the past, Don Veridico planted houses and people around the El Springe nightclub, so that the nightclub would not be left alone. This event happened, they say, in the city where he was born. And they say there was a treasure there, hidden in the house of an old Calandrica. Once a month, the old man, who was out of breath, got up and went to collect his pension. Taking advantage of his absence, thieves from Montevideo invaded his house. The thieves searched and searched for the treasure in every nook and cranny. The only thing they found was a wooden chest, covered with blankets, in a corner of the basement. The formidable padlock which defended it resisted, unconquered, the attack of the pickaxes. So they took the safe. And when they finally managed to open it, far from it, they discovered that the trunk was full of letters. These were the love letters the old man had received throughout his long life. The thieves were going to burn the letters. It has been discussed. Finally, they decided to return them. And one by one. One per week. Since then, every Monday at noon, the old man sat on the top of the hill. There, I expected the postman to appear en route. As soon as he saw the horse appear, fat with saddlebags, through the trees, the old man began to run. The postman, who already knew, brought his letter by hand. And even St. Peter listened to the beating of this mad heart with the joy of hearing a woman's words. It happened /3. What is the truth? The truth is a lie told by Fernando Silva. Fernando has his whole body, not just words, and he can transform into other people or a flying insect or whatever, and he does it in such a way that later on you hear, say, the bugle bird singing in a branch, and you think, this bird imitates Fernando when Fernando imitates the bugle bird. He recounts the events of the pretty little people of the city, the people of recent creation, who still smell of mud, and he also recounts the events of some weird guys he met, like that mirror maker who made mirrors and got into them and got lost, or that volcano extinguisher that the devil left one-eyed out of revenge, spitting out one of his eyes. The events take place in places where Fernando was. The hotel that only opened for ghosts, the mansion where witches died of boredom, or Tecuantepe's house, which was so dark and cool it made you want to have a girlfriend waiting there. In addition, Fernando works as a doctor. He prefers herbs to pills and heals ulcers with cardo santo and pigeon's egg, but to herbs he prefers his own hand. Because it heals by touching. And count, which is another way to play. Good night. Fernando Silva runs the Children's Hospital of Managua. On Christmas Eve, he stayed up very late. The rockets were already ringing, and the QF fireworks were starting to light up the sky, when Fernando decided to leave. They were waiting at home to celebrate. He walked around the rooms one last time, to see if everything was in order, and that's when he felt footsteps following him. A few cotton steps, he turned around and discovered that one of the patients was behind him. In the darkness, he recognized. He was a boy who was alone. Fernando recognized his face already scarred by death and those eyes that were apologizing or perhaps asking permission. Fernando approached and the boy touched him with his hand. "Say," whispered the boy. "Tell someone I'm here. Nothing fleas dream of buying a dog and nothing's dream of getting out of poverty, that some magic day luck will suddenly rain, luck will rain in buckets, but good luck doesn't rain yesterday, or today, or tomorrow, or ever, good luck doesn't even drizzle from the sky, no matter how many dummies call it and even if they ask for it with their hands left, or raise the right foot, or start the year by changing brooms. Dummies, nobody's children, owners of nothing. Dummies, 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 running the hair, dying life, damn, damn. That they are not, even if they are. That there were no languages, only dialects. They do not profess religions, but superstitions. They do not make art, but craftsmanship. Do not practice culture, but folklore. That they are not human beings, but human resources. They don't have faces, but arms. Who don't have names, but numbers. That they do not appear in universal history, but in the red chronicle of the local press. Dummies, who cost less than the bullet that kills them. Hunger/1. Leaving San Salvador, heading for Guazapa, Berta Navarro found a peasant woman expelled by war, one of the thousands and thousands of peasant women expelled by war. In no way did she differ from the many others, nor from the many others, women and men who had fallen from famine to famine and a half. But this skinny, ugly peasant woman stood in the midst of the desolation, with no flesh between her bones and her skin, and in her hand was a little skinny, ugly bird. The little bird was dead and she was very slowly pulling out its feathers. Chronicle of the City of Caracas. I need someone to hear me. He shouted. They always tell me to come tomorrow. He shouted. He threw away the shirt. Then stockings and shoes. José Manuel Pereira stood on the cornice of the 18th floor of a building in Caracas. The police wanted to catch him and couldn't. A psychologist told him about the nearest window. Later, a priest brought him the word of God. I don't want any more promises, shouted José Manuel. From the windows of the South Tower restaurant, he could be seen standing on the ledge, his hands glued to the wall. It was lunchtime, and it was the topic of conversation at every table. Down in the street, a crowd had gathered. 6 hours passed. In the end, people were fed up. Let it be decided, said the people. Let him throw himself immediately. Thinking people. The firefighters tied a rope to him. At first he ignored it. But finally he reached out one hand, then the other, and holding onto the rope, he slid down to the 16th floor, then he tried to climb through an open window and slipped and fell over the edge. Hitting the ground, the body made a sound like a bomb exploding. Then the people left, and the ice cream vendors and the sausage vendors and the beer vendors and canned soda vendors left. Notice. For sale. A half-muzzled black woman, from the Cabinda nation, for the amount of 430 pesos. It has sewing and ironing principles. Fresh leeches from Europe, of the best quality, 4, 5 and 621. A car, in 500 patacons, or we exchange it for a black one. A black woman, aged 13 to 14, without vices, from a Bangalore nation. An 11-year-old mulatto, with the principles of a tailor. Essence of sarsaparilla, 2 pesos a bottle. A gilt with a few days of calving. She doesn't have a baby, but she has plenty of good milk. A lion, gentle as a dog, who eats everything, and also a chest of drawers and a mahogany box. A maid without vices or illnesses, of the Conga nation, about 18 years old, and also a piano and other furniture, at comfortable prices. From the Uruguayan newspapers of 1840, 27 years after the abolition of slavery. As Chronicle of the City of Rio and High in the night of Rio de Janeiro, luminous, generous, the Christ of Corcovado stretches out his arms. Under these arms the grandchildren of slaves find refuge. A barefoot woman looks at Christ, from afar below, and emphasizing the brilliance, says very sadly, "He won't be here. They told me they were going to get him out of here." "Don't worry," a neighbor assures him. "Don't worry, he's back." Many are killed by the police, and many more by the economy. In the violent city, the shots resound and also the drums, eager for comfort and revenge, call the African gods. Christ alone is not enough. Numbers and people. Where is per capita income collected? Many a hungry man would like to know. With us, numbers are luckier than people. How many are doing well when the economy is doing well? How much does the development develop? In Cuba, the revolution triumphed in the most prosperous year in the island's economic history. In Central America, the statistics smiled and laughed as people got screwed and desperate. In the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, stormy years, turbulent times, Central America had the highest economic growth rates in the world and the greatest regional development in human history. In Colombia, rivers of blood intersect with rivers of gold. Splendors of the economy, years of easy money, in full euphoria, the country produces cocaine, coffee, and crimes in crazy quantities. Hunger/2. Detachment system, only the beef is well licked. The neighbor is not your brother, nor your lover. The neighbor is a competitor, an enemy, an obstacle to jump or a thing to use. The system, which does not give food, does not give love either, it condemns many to hunger for bread and many more to hunger for hugs. New York Chronicle. It's early in the morning and I'm far from the hotel, well south of Manhattan Island. I take a taxi. I give the address in perfect English, perhaps dictated by the ghost of my great-great-grandfather from Liverpool. The driver answers me in perfect Guayaquil Spanish. A little further on, the driver tells me about his life. He starts talking and doesn't stop. He speaks without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the stream of car headlights on the avenue. He tells me about the muggings he's been through, and the times they tried to kill him, and the traffic madness in this New York City, and he tells me about vertigo, buy, use, throw away, be bought, be used, be thrown away, and here it's about getting your way with a clean trunk, whether you crash or crash, they run over you, and he's been into this since he was a kid, like he sees him, since he was a boy recently arrived from Ecuador, and he tells me that now the woman has left him. The wife left him after 12 years of marriage. It's not his fault, she said. I go in and I finish, he said. She never loved, she said. He says it's because of the prostate. The walls say /1. In the children's section of the Bogota Book Fair, the locopter is very fast, but very slow. On Boulevard de Montevideo, facing the river sea. A winged man prefers the night. From Santiago de Cuba. How I pass the walls remembering you. And in the heights of Valparaiso, I love us. To love is. We loved them rolling in space and we were a tasty, saucy little ball of meat, a single hot ball that glowed and gave off juicy flavors and vapors as it rolled around in Helena's dream and through the endless space, and the rolling was falling gently, until it ended up at the bottom of a large salad. She stayed there, this little ball that she and I were, and from the bottom of the salad we could see the sky. We barely peeked through the thick lettuce foliage, celery stalks, and parsley forest, and managed to see stars sailing through the far reaches of the night. Theology/1. The Catechism taught me, in my childhood, to do good out of convenience and not to do evil out of fear. God offered me punishments and rewards, threatened me with hell and promised me paradise, and I feared and believed. The years have passed. I no longer fear or trust. And in any case, I think, if I deserve to be roasted on the grill, over an eternal low fire, so be it. It will save me from the purgatory of M, which will be full of horrible bourgeois tourists, and in the end, justice will be served. Sincerely, I deserve. I never killed anyone, it's true, but it was for lack of courage or time, and not for lack of desire. I don't go to Mass on Sundays or on public holidays. I have coveted almost all my neighbors' wives, except the ugly ones, and that is why I have violated, at least intentionally, the private property which God himself has consecrated on the tablets of Moses. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his bull, nor his donkey. And as if that were not enough, with premeditation and betrayal I committed the act of love without the noble intention of reproducing labor power. I know well that carnal sin is frowned upon in the heavens above, but I suspect that God condemns what he does not know. Theology/2. The God of Christians, God of my childhood, does not make love. Perhaps he is the only God who has never made love, among all the gods of all religions in human history. Every time I think about it, I feel sorry for him. And then I forgive him for being my punishing superfather, police chief of the universe, and I think that after all, God also knew how to be my friend at that time, when I believed in him and believed that he believed in me. Then I listen, at the time of the magic rumors, between sunset and nightfall, and it seems to me that I hear their melancholy confidences. Theology/3. Errata, where the Old Testament says what it says, it should say what perhaps its main protagonist confessed to me. Too bad Adam was so rude. Too bad Eva is so deaf. And it's a pity that I didn't know how to make myself understood. Adam and Eve were the first human beings to be born by my hand, and I admit that they had certain flaws in structure, assembly, and finish. They were not ready to listen, nor to think. And well, maybe I wasn't ready to talk. Before Adam and Eve, I had never talked to anyone. I had pronounced beautiful sentences, like "let there be light," but always in solitude. So that afternoon when I met Adam and Eve in the time of the breeze, I wasn't very eloquent. I lacked practice. The first thing I felt was amazement. They had just stolen the fruit from the forbidden tree, in the center of paradise. Adam had put on the face of a general who has just handed over the sword, and Eve was staring at the ground, as if counting the ants. But they were both incredibly young, beautiful, and radiant. They surprised me. I had made them, but I did not know that mud could be luminous. Later, I confess, I felt envy. Since no one can give me orders, I ignore the dignity of disobedience. Nor can I know the audacity of love, which requires to. In homage to the principle of authority, I resisted the urge to congratulate them on having suddenly become wise in human passions. Then came the errors. They understood fall where I was talking about flight. They believed that a sin deserves punishment if it is original. I said that he who does not love sins, they have understood that he who loves sins. Where I heralded a festive meadow, they included a veil of tears. I said that pain was the salt that gave flavor to the human adventure, they understood that I condemned them by giving them the glory of being mortal and mad. They took it all backwards. And they believed it. I've been having insomnia issues lately. For several millennia, I have had trouble sleeping. And I like to sleep, I like that a lot, because when I sleep, I dream. So I become a lover, I burn in the ephemeral fire of fleeting loves, I am. League comedian, big game fisherman or gypsy fortune teller, I even devour the leaves of the forbidden tree and drink and dance until I roll on the ground. When I wake up, I'm alone. I have no one to play with, because the angels take me so seriously, and I have no one to want. I am condemned to desire myself. From star to star I wander, bored in the empty universe. I feel very tired, I feel very alone. I am alone, I am alone, alone for eternity. Night/1. I cannot sleep. I have a woman crossed between the eyelids. If I could, I would tell him to go away, but I have a woman stuck in my throat. And diagnosis and therapy. Love is one of the most damned and contagious diseases. To the sick, everyone recognizes us. Dark circles under our eyes reveal that we never sleep, awakened night after night by hugs, or lack of hugs, and we suffer devastating fevers and feel an irresistible urge to talk nonsense. Love can be induced by casually dropping a handful of love powder into coffee or soup or drink. It can be caused, but it cannot be avoided. Holy water does not prevent it, nor harbor dust. The clove of garlic is also not useless. Love is deaf to the divine word and to the charm of witches. There is no government decree that can deal with it, nor a potion that can avoid it, even though the sellers proclaim, in the markets, infallible concoctions with guarantees and all. Night/2. Tear me, madam, the clothes and the doubts. Undress me, undress me. You will call them. The moon calls the sea and the sea calls the humble trickle of water which, in search of the sea, runs and runs from wherever it is, however far it is, and as it runs it grows and grows, rushes, and there is no mountain that can stop his chest. The sun calls the vine, which, wanting the sun, stretches and climbs. The first morning air calls in the smells of the awakening city, the aroma of freshly toasted bread, the aroma of freshly ground coffee, and the aromas enter the air and take over the air. The night calls the flowers of the camelot, and at exactly midnight these white rays burst in the river, open the darkness and penetrate it, break it, and devour it. Night/3. I don't fall asleep on the edge of a woman, I fall asleep on the edge of an abyss. The little death. Love does not make us laugh when it reaches the bottom of its journey, at the height of its flight, in the depths, at the highest, it makes us moan and moan, voice of pain, even if it is pain jubilant, he thinking about it, nothing is strange, because being born is a joy that hurts. Little death, we call in France the culmination of the embrace, which breaking us together, and losing us, finds us, and finishing us, begins us. The little death, they say, but it must be big, very big, if it is by killing us that it is born. Night/4. I get rid of the embrace, I go out into the street. In the sky, already illuminating, the moon is drawn, finished. The moon has 2 nights. Me 1. The devourer has devoured. The octopus has the eyes of the fisherman who pierces it. The man who will be eaten by the earth which nourishes him is made of earth. The sun eats the mother and the earth eats the sky every time she receives rain from her breasts. The flower closes, greedy, on the beak of the bird eager for its honey. There is no boy who is not a boy nor a lover who is not mouth and mouthful, devourer devoured, the lovers eat each other from start to finish, all powerful, all possessed, without leaving a single one. Point left on the ear or toe. Say the wall/2. In Buenos Aires, on the La Boca Bridge. Everyone promises and no one keeps. Vote for nobody. In Caracas, in times of crisis, at the entrance to one of the poorest neighborhoods, welcome, middle class. In Bogotá, just around the corner from the National University, God lives. And below, with another letter, pure miracle. And also in Bogotá, proletarians of all countries, united. And below, with another letter, latest notice. Professional life/1. At the end of 1987, Hector Abad Gomez denounced that a man's life was not worth more than $8. When his article was published in a Medellin newspaper, he had already been murdered. Hector Abad Gomez was the president of the Human Rights Commission. In Colombia, it is rare to die of disease. How do you want the corpse, Your Grace? The matador receives half as a deposit. He loads the gun and crosses himself. Ask God to help you in your work. Then, if his aim is correct, he charges the other half. And in the church, on his knees, he thanks divine favor. Chronicle of the City of Bogotá. When the curtain fell, at the end of each night, Patricla Ariza, condemned to death, closed her eyes. In silence, he thanked the audience's applause, and also thanked another day of life mocked at death. Patricia was on the doom list for thinking red and living red, and the sentences were carried out, relentlessly, one after the other. He was even homeless. A bomb could blow up the building, the neighbors, obeying the law of fear, demanded that he leave. She wore a bulletproof vest on the streets of Bogotá. There was no other choice, but the waistcoat was sad and ugly. One day Patricia sewed some sequins on her, and another day she embroidered colorful flowers, flowers falling like rain on her breasts, and so the cardigan was happy and neat for her, and it was a bad thing that she can get used to always wearing it. And not even on stage he did not take it off. When Patricia traveled outside Colombia to perform in European theaters, she gifted her bulletproof vest to a peasant named Julio Cannon. Julio Cannon, mayor of the town of Vista Hermosa, had already had his entire family killed, as a warning, but he refused to wear this flowery vest. "I don't wear women's clothes," he said. With scissors, Patricia tore off the sequins and colors, then the man accepted. That night, they shot him. With the vest. Praise public speaking. In power, there is a division of labor. The army, armed gangs and assassins on the run face social contradictions and the class struggle. The civilians are in charge of the speeches. In Bogotá there are several speech factories, although only one of them, the National Speech Factory, has a telephone number registered in the directory. These industrial facilities have given speeches in the campaigns of many presidential candidates in Colombia and neighboring countries, and usually produce tailor-made speeches to interview ministers, inaugurate schools or prisons, celebrate weddings or anniversaries, or baptisms, commemorate heroes from the history of the country and praise the deceased who leave gaps that cannot be filled. Me, the least indicated perhaps. Professional life/2. They have the same first name, the same last name. They live in the same house and wear the same shoes. They sleep on the same pillow, next to the same woman. Every morning, the mirror sends them the same face. But he and he are not the same person. And me, what do I have to do? He said, speaking of himself, shrugging his shoulders. I follow orders, he says, or says, that's what they pay me for. Or say, if I don't do it, someone else will. Which amounts to saying, I am another. Faced with the victim's hatred, the executioner experiences astonishment, even a certain feeling of injustice. After all, he is a civil servant, a simple civil servant who fulfills his schedule and his task. After an exhausting day's work, the torturer washes his hands. Amadou Garib, who fought for the independence of Algeria, told me about it. Amadou was tortured by a French officer for several months. And every day, at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the torturer wiped the sweat from his brow, unplugged the electric prod and put away the other work tools. Then he would sit next to the tortured man and tell him about his family problems, the promotion that never came, and the cost of living. The torturer spoke of his insufferable wife and newborn son, who hadn't let him sleep a wink all night. He spoke against Oran, that shitty town, and against the colonel's son of a bitch who. Amadou, bleeding, shaking with pain, burning with fever, said nothing. Professional life/3. The bankers of the great bank of the world, who practice money terrorism, can do more than kings and marshals and more than the Pope of Rome himself. They never get their hands dirty. They don't kill anyone, they just applaud the show. Its leaders, the international technocrats, run our countries. They are neither presidents nor ministers, and have not been elected in any election, but they decide on the level of salaries and public expenditure, investments and divestments, prices, TL taxes, interest, subsidies, sunrise time and rainfall frequency. On the other hand, they do not deal with prisons, nor torture chambers, nor concentration camps, nor extermination centers, although the inevitable consequences of their actions occur in these places. Technocrats claim the privilege of irresponsibility. We are neutral, they say. World Map/1. The system, with one hand we steal what we lend with the other. His victims. The more they pay, the more they owe. The more they receive, the less they have. The more they sell, the less they charge. World Map/2. The South, repression. To the North, the depression. There are not few intellectuals from the North who marry the revolutions of the South for the simple pleasure of being widowed. Prestigiously they cry out to pictures, they cry out to the seas, the death of every illusion, and they are never slow to discover that socialism is the longest road from capitalism to capitalism. Northern fashion, universal fashion, celebrates neutral art and applauds the viper who bites its tail and finds it tasty. Culture and politics have become consumer goods. The presidents are chosen by television, like soap operas, and the poets fulfill a decorative function. There is no more magic than the magic of the market, nor more heroes than bankers. Democracy is a Nordic luxury. The South has a right to the show, which is not denied to anyone. And no one cares much, after all, that politics is democratic, as long as the economy is not. When the curtain falls, once the votes have been cast in the ballot boxes, reality imposes the law of the strongest, which is the law of money. This is the way the natural order of things would have it. In the south of the world, the system teaches, violence and hunger are not of history, but of nature, and justice and freedom have been condemned to hate each other. Forget/1. I'm reading a novel by Louise Erdrich. At a certain height, a great-grandfather meets his great-grandson. The great-grandfather is completely gifted, his thoughts are the color of water, and smiles the same smug smile as his newborn great-grandson. The great-grandfather is happy because he has lost the memory he had. The great-grandson is happy because he still has no memory. Here, I think, is perfect happiness. I don't want her. Forget/2. Fear dries up the mouth, wets the hands and mutilates. The fear of knowing condemns us to ignorance, the fear of doing reduces us to helplessness. The military dictatorship, fear to listen, fear to speak, has made us deaf and dumb. But democracy, which is afraid to remember, makes us sick with amnesia, but you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to know that there is no carpet that can hide the trash of memory. The fear. One morning they gave us a guinea pig. He returned to the cage. At noon, I opened the cage door. I returned at nightfall to find him just as I had left him, cage inside, glued to the bars, trembling and frightened by freedom. The river of oblivion. The first time I went to Galicia, my friends took me to Rio del Olvido. My friends told me that the Roman legionnaires, in imperial antiquity, had wanted to invade these lands, but they had not passed from here, paralyzed by panic, they had stopped at the edge of this river. And they had never crossed it, because whoever crosses the river of oblivion reaches the other bank without knowing who he is or where he comes from. I began my exile in Spain, and I said to myself, if the waters of a river are enough to erase memory, what will become of me, remains of a shipwreck, that I crossed a whole sea? But I had visited the small towns of Pontevedra and Orense, and I had discovered taverns and cafes called Uruguay or Venezuela or Mi Buenos Aires Corrito and cantinas that offered barbecues or arepas, and everywhere there were banners of Peñarol and Nacional and Boca Juniors. And it was all from the Galicians who had returned from America and were now feeling the nostalgia in reverse. They had left their villages, exiled like me, even though the economy had driven them away and not the police, and after many years they were back in their homeland, and they had never forgotten anything. Neither leaving, nor being there, nor returning, they had never forgotten anything. And now they had two memories and they had two homelands. Forget/3. In the French Caribbean islands, history textbooks teach that Napoleon was the most admirable warrior in the West. On these islands, Napoleon re-established slavery in 1802. With blood and fire, he forced free blacks back into plantation slavery. The texts say nothing about it. Blacks are Napoleon's grandsons, not his victims. Forget/4. Chicago is full of factories. There are factories even in the heart of the city, around the tallest building in the world. Chicago is full of factories, Chicago is full of workers. Arrived in the district of Haymarket, I asked my friends to show me the place where, in 1886, these workers whom the whole world salutes every May 1st were hanged. It must be around here, they tell me. But no one knows. No statue has been erected to him in memory of the Chicago martyrs in the city of Chicago. No statue, no monolith, no bronze plaque, nothing. The 1st of May is the only truly universal day of all humanity, the only day when all the histories and all the geographies, all the languages and the religions and the cultures of the world coincide, but in the United States, May Day is any day. On that day, People work normally, and hardly anyone remembers that the rights of the working class did not come out of a goat's ear, nor from the hand of God or the master. After the vain exploration of the Haymarket, my friends take me to see the best bookstore in town. And there, out of pure curiosity, by pure chance, I discovered an old poster waiting for me, slipped among many other movie and rock music posters. The poster reproduces an African proverb: until lions have their own historians, hunting tales will continue to glorify the hunter. Celebration of subjectivity. I had been writing Memoria del Fuego for a long time, and the more I wrote, the deeper I got into the stories I told. It was already difficult for me to distinguish the past from the present. What had been was and was around me, and writing was my way of hitting and kissing. However, history books are not meant to be subjective. I commented to Don Jose Coronel Urtco, in this book that I write, upside down and upside down, through the light and up to the light, no matter how you look at it, my quarrels and my loves are obvious to me at first glance. And on the banks of the San Juan River, the old poet told me not to give a damn attention to the fanatics of objectivity. Don't worry, he told me. It must be so. Those who make a religion of objectivity are lying. They don't want to be objective, to lie, they want to be objects, to save themselves from human pain. Celebration of the marriage of reason and heart. What is the use of writing, if not to pick up the pieces? As soon as we enter school or church, education dismembers us. It teaches us to separate the soul from the body and reason from the heart. The wise doctors of ethics and morals must be the fishermen of the Colombian coast, who coined the word sentipensanti to define the language that speaks the truth. Divorces. A system of disconnect ions, so that the silent do not ask questions, so that the opinionated do not become opinionated. So that the only ones do not assemble, nor that the soul does not pick up its pieces. The system separates emotion and thought as it separates sex and love, private life and public life, past and present. If the past has nothing to say to the present, history can sleep quietly in the closet where the system keeps its old disguises. The system empties our memory, or fills it with garbage, and thus teaches us to repeat history instead of making it. Tragedies repeat themselves like farces, announced the famous prophecy. But between us, it's worse, dramas repeat themselves like dramas. Celebration of contradiction / 1. Like a tragic litany, stupid memory repeats itself. Living memory, on the contrary, is born every day, because it is of what it was and against what it was. Aufheben was Hegel's favorite verb of all the verbs in the German language. Aufheben means both to keep and to annul, and thus pays homage to human history, which dying is born and breaking creates. Celebration of contradiction / 2. Liberating voices, disentangling dreams. I write wanting to reveal the marvelous reality, and I discover the marvelous reality at the exact center of the horrifying reality of America. In these lands, the head of the god Eligua bears death on its neck and life on its face. Every promise is a threat, each loss, an encounter. Courage is born from fears, and doubts, certainties. Dreams announce another possible reality and delusions, another reason. After all, we are what we do to change who we are. Identity is not a museum piece, silent in the display case, but the always astonishing synthesis of our daily contradictions. In this faith, fleeting, I believe. It seems to me the only trustworthy faith, so much does it resemble the human beast, damned but sacred, and the crazy adventure of living in the world. Chronicle of Mexico. Half a century after Superman was born in New York, Superbarrio roams the streets and rooftops of Mexico City. The prestigious American steel, universal symbol of power, lives in a city called Metropolis. Superbarrio, like a flesh and blood Mexican, hero of the poor, lives in a suburb called Nezahualcóyotl. Superbarrio has a crooked belly and legs. He wears a red mask and a yellow cape. He does not fight mummies, ghosts, or vampires. In a corner of town, he clashes with the police and saves starving people from eviction. At the other end, at the same time, she is leading a demonstration for women's rights or against the poisoning of the air, and in the center, meanwhile, he invades the National Congress and launches a harangue denouncing the dirty tricks of the government. Counter symbols. By the art of alchemy or popular malice, the symbols are dispelled and the poison is transformed into bread. In Havana, a stone's throw from the Casa de las Americas, there is a rare monument. A pair of bronze shoes on a tall pedestal. The solitary shoes belonged to the amiable Tomás Estrada Palma. The enraged people toppled his statue and that was all that was left. At the beginning of the century, Estrada Palma had been the first president of Cuba, under the colonial occupation of the United States. Paradoxes. If contradiction is the lung of history, paradox must be, it seems to me, the mirror that history uses to tease us. Even the Son of God himself was not saved from the paradox. He chose to be born in a subtropical desert where it hardly ever snows, but snow has become a universal symbol of Christmas since Europe decided to Europeanize Jesus. And to make matters worse, the birth of Jesus is, today, the business that brings in the most money for the merchants whom Jesus had driven out of the temple. Napoleon Bonaparte, the most French of the French, was not French. Joseph Stalin, the most Russian of Russians, was not Russian, and the most German of Germans, Adolfo Hitler, was born in Austria. Margherita Sarfatti, the most beloved wife of the anti-Semite Mussolini, was Jewish. José Carlos Mariátegui, the most Marxist of Latin American Marxists, believed ardently in God. Che Guevara had been declared totally unfit for military life by the Argentine army. From the hands of a sculptor named Aleijadon Ho, who was the ugliest of Brazilians, the highest beauties of Brazil were born. Black North Americans, the most oppressed, created jazz, which is the freest of all forms of music. In the confinement of a prison, Don Quixote, the most wandering of knights, was conceived. And to make matters worse, Don Quixote never said his most famous phrase. He never said, "They're barking, Sancho, it's a sign that we're driving." "You're nervous," said the hysteric. "I hate you," said the lover. There will be no devaluation, assures, on the eve of the devaluation, the PS Minister of the Economy. The military respect the Constitution, said the Minister of Defense on the eve of the coup. In its war against the Sandinista revolution, the government of the United States coincided, paradoxically, with the Communist Party of Nicaragua. And paradoxical, after all, had been the Sandinista barricades under the Somoza dictatorship, the barricades, which closed the street, opened the way. The system/1. Civil servants do not work. Politicians speak but do not say. Voters vote, but do not choose. The news media misinform. Schools teach ignoring. The judges convict the victims. The army is at war with its compatriots. The police do not fight crimes, because they are busy committing them. Bankruptcies are socialized, profits are privatized. Money is freer than people. People are at the service of things. Praise of common sense. At dawn one day in late 1985, Colombian radio stations reported, "Gunsmith City has been wiped off the map. The nearby volcano killed her. No one could outrun the boiling mudslide, a wave as big as the cycle and hot as hell swept over the city, smoking and roaring the furies of evil beasts, engulfing 30,000 people and everything else." The volcano had been alerting for a year. For an entire year he poured down fire, and when he could wait no longer he unloaded upon the city a bombardment of thunder and a rain of ash, so that LA might hear the deaf and the blind see so much of warning. But the mayor said the higher government said there was no cause for alarm, and the priest said the bishop said God was dealing with the matter, and the geologists and volcanologists said everything was under control and out of danger. The city of Armero is dead to civilization. He had not yet completed a century of life. He had neither him nor shield. The Indian/1. Coming from Temuka, I fall asleep during the trip. Suddenly, the reflections of the landscape wake me up. The Ripokura Valley appears and shines before my eyes, as if someone had suddenly drawn the curtain of another world. But these lands no longer belong to everyone and no one, as before. A decree from the Pinochet dictatorship shattered the communities, forcing the Indians into solitude. Yet they persist in pooling their poverty, and they still work together, are silent together, say together. You have been under a dictatorship for 15 years, they explain to my Chilean friends, we have less than 5 centuries. We sit in a circle. To be gathered in a medical center that doesn't have, or ever had, a doctor, or a practitioner, or a nurse, or anything. One is to die for, no more, said one of the women. The Indians, guilty of being incapable of private property, do not exist. In Chile, there are no Indians, there are only Chileans, say the government posters. The Indians /2. Language as betrayal, the executioners shout at them. In Ecuador, executioners call their victims executioners. Indian executioners. They yell at them. Out of 3 Ecuadorians, 1 is Indian. The other 2 reproach him, every day, for the historic defeat. We are the losers. They won the war for us. We lost by believing them. That's why, Miguel tells me, born deep in the Amazon jungle. They are treated like blacks in South Africa, Indians cannot enter hotels or restaurants. At school, they bit me when I spoke our language, tells me Lucho, born in the south of the mountains. My father forbade me to speak Kiswa. It's for your own good, he told me, remembers Rosa, Lucho's wife. Rosa and Lucho live in Quito. They are used to hearing. Fucking Indian. Indians are stupid, lazy, drunk. But the system that despises them, despises what it ignores, because it ignores what it fears. Behind the mask of contempt, panic appears, these ancient voices, stubbornly alive, what are they saying? What do they say when they talk? What do they say when they are silent? Future traditions. There is only one place where yesterday and today meet, recognize, and embrace, and that place is tomorrow. Certain voices from the very past American past sound very future. The old voices, let's say, that still tell us that we are children of the earth, and that the mother is neither sold nor rented. As dead birds rain down on Mexico City, and the rivers turn into sewers, the seas into dumps and the jungles into deserts, these stubbornly lively voices announce to us another world which is not this poisonous world of water, of the ground and the air. Soul. The ancient voices that speak to us of community also announce another possible world. The community, mode of production and community life, is the most distant tradition of the Americas, the most American of all. It belongs to the first times and to the first peoples, but it also belongs to the times to come and anticipates a new world. Because there is nothing less foreign than socialism in our lands. The foreigner is rather capitalism, like smallpox, like the flu, he came from outside. The kingdom of cockroaches. When I visited Cedric Belfridge in Cuernavaca, the city of Los Angeles already contained 16 million mobile people, people with wheels instead of legs, so it didn't look much like the city he had known when he arrived. In Hollywood during the silent film era, and it didn't even sound like the town Cedric still loved when Senator McCarthy IP was ousted during the witch hunt. Since the eviction, Cedric lives in Cuernavaca. Friends, survivors of old Pempos, appear from time to time in his bright and airy house, and a mysterious tequila-drinking white butterfly also appears from time to time. I was from Los Angeles and I was in the neighborhood where Cedric lived, but he didn't ask me about Los Angeles. Los Angeles didn't interest him, or he pretended not to. Instead, he asked me about my days in Canada, and we started talking about acid rain. The toxic gases from the factories, sent back to Earth from the clouds, had already destroyed 14,000 lakes in Canada. There was no more life, No more plants, no more fish, in those 14,000 lakes. I had seen a small part of this catastrophe. Old Cedric looked at me with his big transparent eyes and pretended to kneel before those who will reign on earth. Human beings have abdicated the planet, he proclaimed, in favor of cockroaches. Then he brought the bottle closer and filled the glasses. A little drink, while you can. The Indians/3. Jean-Marie Simon discovered it in Guatemala. It happened at the end of 1983, in a village called Tabil, south of Mquiche. The military had waged their campaign to wipe out the indigenous communities. They had wiped out 400 villages in less than 3 years. They burned crops, killed Indians. They burned to the roots, they even killed the children. We will leave them without seed, announced Colonel Horacio Maldonado Shad. So they arrived one afternoon in the village of Tabil. They came and dragged 5 prisoners, bound hand and foot and disfigured by beatings. The 5 were from the village, were born there, lived there, grew up there, but the officer said they were Cuban enemies of the homeland. The community had to decide what punishment they deserved and carry out the punishment. In case they decided to shoot them, he would leave their guns already loaded. And he said he gave them till noon tomorrow. In assembly, the Indians discussed. These men are our brothers. These men are innocent. If we don't kill them, the soldiers kill us. The whole night they spent arguing. The prisoners in the center of the gathering listened. Dawn came and everyone was like at the beginning. They hadn't made any decisions and they were getting more and more confused. Then they asked for help from the gods, the Mayan gods and the God of the Christians. In vain they waited for the answer. No god said anything. All the gods were silent. Meanwhile, the soldiers waited on a nearby hill. The people of Tabil watched the sun relentlessly climb in the sky. The prisoners, standing, were silent. Shortly before noon, the soldiers heard the shots. The Indians/4. On Vancouver Island, says Ruth Benedict, the Indians organized tournaments to measure the greatness of princes. The rivals clashed, destroying their assets. They threw the draw their canoes, their fish oil and their salmon eggs, and from a high promontory they threw their blankets and their ships into the sea. The one who stripped himself of everything won. The culture of terror/1. The Société d'Anthropologie de Paris classified them as insects. The skin color of the Huatoto Indians corresponded to the numbers 29 and 30 of their chromatic scale. The Peruvian Amazon Company hunted them like beasts. The Huatoto Indians were the slave labor that supplied rubber to the world market. When the Indians fled the plantations and the company caught them, they were wrapped in a kerosene-soaked Peruvian flag and burned alive. Michael Taussig has studied the culture of terror that capitalist civilization applied in the Amazon jungle at the beginning of the 20th century. Torture was not a method to extract information, but a ceremony to confirm power. In a long and solemn ritual, rebellious Indians had their tongues cut out and then tortured to force them to speak. The culture of terror/2. Extortion. The insult. The threat. The bump on the head. The slap. Shots. The whip. The dark room. Cold shower. Obligatory fasting. Mandatory food. Ban on going out. The prohibition to say what one thinks. The prohibition to do what you feel. And public humiliation are some of the traditional methods of penance and torture in family life. To punish disobedience and punish freedom, family tradition perpetuates a culture of terror that humiliates women, teaches children to lie, and spreads the scourge of fear. Human rights must start at home, Andrés Dominguez told me in Chile. The culture of terror/3. About the exemplary girl, a girl is playing with 2 dolls and scolding them to keep them still. She also looks like a doll, because of her beauty and kindness and because no one bothers her. From the book Adelante, by J.H. Figuera, which was a textbook in schools in Uruguay until a few years ago. The culture of terror/4. I was in a school for priests in Seville. A boy of 9 or 10 was confessing his sins for the first time. The boy confessed that he stole candy, or that he lied to his mother, or that he copied the office neighbor, or maybe he confessed that he masturbated in thinking of his cousin. Then, from the darkness of the confessional, the hand of the priest emerged, brandishing a bronze cross. The priest forced the boy to kiss the crucified Jesus, and striking his mouth with the cross, he said, "You killed him, you killed him." Julio Velez was that kneeling Andalusian boy. It has been many years. He could never get that out of his memory. The culture of terror /5. Ramona Caraballo was given as a gift as soon as she could walk. In 1950, still a child, she was a slave in a house in Montevideo. He did everything for nothing. One day Grandma came to visit her. Ramona didn't know her or remember her. The grandmother arrived from the field, in a great hurry because she had to return to the village immediately. He came in, beat his granddaughter badly and left. Ramona cried and bled. The grandmother had said to him, raising the whip, "I'm not hitting you for what you did. I hit you for what you're gonna do." The culture of terror /6. Pedro Algorta, a lawyer, showed me the big file on the murder of 2 women. The double crime had been committed with a knife, at the end of 1982, in a suburb of Montevideo. The accused, Alma de Agosto, had confessed. He had been in prison for over a year, and seemed condemned to rot for life in prison. As is customary, the police raped and tortured her. After a month of incessant beatings, several confessions had been extracted from him. Alma de Agosto's confessions were not very similar, as if she had committed the same murder in different ways. In each denomination there were different characters, picturesque ghosts without name or address, because the electric prod turns anyone into a prolific novelist, and in all cases the author has demonstrated the agility of an Olympic athlete, the muscles of a carnival horse and the dexterity of a professional matador. But what was most surprising was the luxury of detail. In each confession, the accused described clothes, gestures, decorations, situations, objects to the nearest millimeter. Alma de Agosto was blind. Her neighbors, who knew and loved her, were convinced that she was guilty. Because? Asked the lawyer. Because the newspapers say so. But the newspapers lie, the lawyer said. It's just that the radio says so too, the neighbors explained. And television /1. It was a suburban lujura, the cheapest thing in Santa Fe and the whole Argentine Republic, a dilapidated warehouse that was collapsing, but Fernando Berry didn't miss any of the movies or the ceremonies that took place in the darkness of this great temple of his childhood. In this cinema, the Golden Cinema, Fernando once saw episodes about the mysteries of ancient Egypt. There was a pharaoh seated on his throne before a pool. Pharaoh seemed asleep, but with one finger he curled his beard. Thereupon he opened his eyes and nodded. Then the magician of the kingdom uttered an incantation and the waters of the pond raged and ignited. When the flames died down and the waters calmed down, Pharaoh leaned over the pool. There, in the transparent waters, he saw all that was happening in Egypt and in the world at that time. Half a century later, evoking the Pharaoh of his childhood, Fernando was sure, this magical pond, where you could see everything that was happening in the distance, was a television. Television /2. TV, watch what's going on? In our countries, television shows what it wants to happen, and nothing happens if the television does not show it. Television, that last light that saves you from loneliness and darkness, is reality. Because life is a spectacle, to those who behave well, the system promises comfortable seating. The culture of the show. Off-screen, the world is an untrustworthy shadow. Before television, before cinema, it was already like that. When Buffalo Bill grabbed a distracted Indian and succeeded in killing him, he quickly proceeded to scalp and plumage and other trophies and galloped from the Wild West to the theaters of New York, where he himself portrayed the heroic deed he had just come. to perform featured. Then, when the curtain opened and Buffalo Bill raised his bloody knife on stage, in the ramp, then it happened, for the first time it happened, it really happened, reality. Television/3. The television takes images that reproduce the system and voices that echo it, and there is not a corner of the world that she does not reach. The whole planet is a vast suburb of Dalfas. We eat imported emotions like canned sausages, while young television children, trained to contemplate life instead of doing it, shrug their shoulders. In Latin America, freedom of expression consists of the right to stomp on the radio and in low circulation newspapers. It is no longer necessary for books to be banned by the police, they are banned by the price. The dignity of art. I write it for those who cannot read me. Those from below, those who have been waiting for centuries for history, do not know how to read or have nothing. When I get discouraged, it does me good to remember a lesson in the dignity of art that I received years ago, in a theater in Assisi, Italy. We had gone with Helena to see a pantomime show, and there was no one there. She and I were the only spectators. When the light went out, we were joined by the usher and the ticket clerk. And yet, the actors, more numerous than the public, worked that evening as if they were living the glory of a sold-out premiere. They did their homework by giving themselves whole, of everything, with soul and life, and it was wonderful. Our applause resounded in the loneliness of the room. We clapped until our hands were scratching. Television/4. Rosa Maria Mateo, one of the most popular personalities on Spanish television, told me about it. A woman had written him a letter, from a distant town, asking him to please tell her the truth. When I look at you, do you look at me? Rosa Maria spoke to me about it and told me that she did not know what to answer. Television/5. In summer, Uruguayan television devotes long programs to Punta del Este. More interested in things than in people, the cameras reach ecstasy when they show the homes of the wealthy on vacation. These ostentatious mansions resemble the marble and bronze mausoleums of La Recoleta Cemetery, which is after Punta M. Este. The chosen ones and their symbols of power scroll across the screen. The system, which builds the social pyramid by choosing the opposite, rewards few people. Here are the winners: loan sharks with good nails and merchants with good teeth, politicians with sprout noses and doctors with rubber backs. Television sets out to flatter those who govern the Rio de la Plata, but inadvertently fulfills an exemplary educational function. It shows us the high peaks and betrays in them the slang and bad taste of the triumphant money hunters. Beneath the apparent stupidity, there is real stupidity. Celebration of mistrust. On the first day of class, the teacher brought a huge bottle. It's full of perfume, he told Miguel Brun and the other students. I want to measure the perception of each of you. When you smell the fragrance, raise your hand. And he discovered the jar. After a while, there were already 2 hands up. And then 5, 10, 30, all hands up. Allow me to open the window, Professor, begged a student, dazed by so much perfume smell, and several voices echoed her. The strong aroma, which hung heavy in the air, had already become unbearable for everyone. Then the teacher showed the pot to the students, one by one. The jar was filled with water. The culture of terror/7. Visible colonialism openly mutilates you, it forbids you to say, it forbids you to do, it forbids you to be. Invisible colonialism, on the contrary, convinces you that servitude is your destiny and that impotence is your nature. It convinces you that this cannot be said, this cannot be done, this cannot be. Alienation/1. In my early years, I was a bank teller. I remember, among the customers, a manufacturer of shirts. The banker renewed his loans out of pity. The poor blouse lived in perpetual anxiety. His shirts weren't bad, but nobody bought them. One night, the blouse was visited by an angel. At dawn, when he awoke, he was illuminated. He jumped. The first thing he did was change the name of his company, which was renamed Uruguay Sociedad Anónima, a patriotic title whose initials are USA. The second thing he did was put a label on the collars of his shirts that said, and he was not lying, made in the USA. The third thing he did was sell shirts like crazy. And the fourth thing he did was pay what he owed and make a lot of money. Alienation/2. Those who govern believe that the best copy is the best. Official culture exalts the virtues of the monkey and the parrot. Alienation in Latin America, a circus show. Importation, imposition, our cities are full of triumphal arches, obelisks, and Parthenons. Bolivia has no sea, but it does have admirals dressed as Lord Nelson. Lima has no rain, but it does have gabled roofs and gutters. In Managua, one of the hottest cities in the world, doomed to perpetual boiling, there are mansions that boast superb wood-burning stoves, and on samosa parties the ladies of the World War stole silver fox. Alienation/3. Leicester Reid writes for The New Yorker but rarely travels to New York. He prefers to live on a secluded ACA beach in the Dominican Republic. Christopher Columbus had landed on this beach a few centuries earlier, during one of his excursions to Japan, and since then nothing has changed. From time to time, the postman appears between the trees. The postman comes bent under the load. Donna Leicester receives mountains of mail. From the United States he is bombarded with commercial offers, brochures, catalogs, lustful temptations from consumer civilization urging him to buy. Once, among the many papers, an advertisement for a rowing machine came. Donna Leicester showed it to his neighbors, the fishermen. Under the roof? Is it used indoors? The fishermen did not believe it. Without water? Can we row without water? They couldn't believe it, they couldn't understand it. And no fish? And without sun? And without, darling. The fishermen told Donna Leicester that they got up every night, long before dawn, and went out to sea and cast their nets as the sun rose over the horizon, and that was their life, and that they loved this life, but that rowing was the only messed up part of the whole. Rowing is the only thing we hate, said the fishermen. Then Donna Leicester explained to them that the rower was used for gymnastics. To do what? Gym. Oh. And what is gymnastics? Say the wall/3. In Montevideo, in the neighborhood of Brazo Oriental, we sit here, watching our dreams kill us. And on the dike, facing the Montevidean port of Bucio. Old Mojara, you can't live in fear all your life. In red letters, along an entire block of Colón Avenue, Quito. How about we all kick that big gray bubble? Name/1. The house of names came, wanting to be called, people and things, insects and things. The names tinkled, offered themselves, they promised good sounds and long echoes. The house was always full of people, bugs and things trying names. Helena dreamed of the house of names and discovered there the dog People Lumpen, who was looking for a more presentable name. Name/2. Arturo Alapi tells me that Manuel Marulanda Velez, the famous Colombian gorilla, was not called that. 40 years ago, when he got up, his name was Pedro Antonio Marin. At that time, Marulanda was another, dark-skinned, tall, Mason by trade and left-handed in ideas. When the police beat Marulanda to death, his comrades gathered in assembly and decided that Marulanda could not be finished. Unanimously, they gave the name to Marin, who has carried it ever since. Mexican Pancho Villa also bore the name of a friend who was killed by the police. Name/3. I signed myself Galeano, which is my mother's surname, since I started writing. It happened when I was 19, or maybe just a few days old, because calling me that was a way of being reborn. Before, when I was little and I published drawings, they were signed Gluz, because of the difficult Spanish pronunciation of my father's last name. HUGS was called my Welsh great-great-grandfather, who at the age of 15 sailed from the port of Liverpool and reached the Caribbean, Santo Domingo, then Rio de Janeiro and finally Montevideo. There he threw his mason gold ring at the Megalite stream, and in the fields of Paysandú he nailed the first barbed wire fences and became the owner of land and people, and more than a century ago, he died, translating Martín Fierro into English. Over the years I have listened to the most diverse versions on this little question of my chosen name. The silliest version, which offends the intelligence, attributes to me an anti-imperialist intention. The funniest version assumes conspiracy or smuggling purposes. And the shittiest version makes me the red sheep of my family. He invents an enemy and oligarchic father for me, instead of the real father I have, who is a wonderful guy who has always lived off his job or the luck he has in swimming pools. The Japanese painter Hokusai changed his name 60 times to celebrate his 60 births. In Uruguay, a formal country, they would have caged him for being a crazy or treacherous pretender of identity. The recoil machine. At the beginning of the 20th century, Uruguay was a country of the 21st century. At the end of the 20th century, Uruguay was a country of the 19th century. In the kingdom of boredom, good customs forbid everything that routine does not impose. Men dream of retiring and women dream of getting married. Young people, guilty of the crime of being young, suffer from loneliness or exile, unless they prove they are old. The pale. My certainties eat doubts for breakfast. And there are days when I feel like a stranger in Montevideo and elsewhere. In these days, days without sun, nights without moon, no place is my place and I cannot recognize myself in anything or anyone. Words don't sound like what they name and don't even sound like their own. So I'm not where I am. I leave my body and go, far away, nowhere, and I don't want to be with anyone, not even with myself, and I don't have or want to have a name. Then I lose the desire to call myself or to be called. Bad luck. As long as the losing streak lasts, I lose everything. Things fall from my pockets and from my memory, I lose keys, pens, money, documents, names, faces, words. I don't know if it's bad from someone who doesn't like me and finds me worse, or purely by chance, but sometimes the slowdown takes a while to go away and I go from loss to loss. Loss, I lose what I find, I don't find what I seek, and I am very afraid that my life will fall into some distraction. 1. I was not even 20 years old and I played blind chicken at night in the world. I wanted to paint and I couldn't. I wanted to write and I didn't know. Sometimes he would write a story, and sometimes he would bring it to Juan Carlos 1. He was still in bed, out of laziness, out of sadness, surrounded by pyramids of cigarette butts, behind a wall of empty bottles. I felt compelled to utter extremely intelligent sentences. Maestro 1 stared at the ceiling and only opened his mouth to yawn, smoke and drink, slowly asleep, slow puffs, slow swallows, and perhaps mumbled some fruits of his prolonged meditations on the national and international situation. Things went wrong, he said, the day soldiers and women learned to read. Sitting near his shore, I expected him to tell me that my little stories were undoubtedly great, but he was silent and at most growled or stimulated me like this. Look, kid. If Beethoven had been born in Tacuarembó, he would have become director of the city orchestra. Argutas. I was coming back from Montevideo, after a trip. I don't remember where I came from, but I remember that on the plane I had read El Zorro de Arriba y El Zorro de Abajo, the latest novel by José María Argutas. Argutas had begun writing this farewell to life the day he decided to kill himself, and the novel was his long and desperate testament. I read it and I believed it, from the first page I believed it, even if I didn't know this man, I believed him as if he were my lifelong friend. In El Zorro, Argutas had given 1 the greatest praise that a writer could give to another writer. He had written that he was in Santiago de Chile, but that he really wanted to be in Montevideo, to meet 1 and shake the hand with which he writes. At 1 I told him about it. He did not know. The recently published novel had not yet arrived in Montevideo. I told him about it and Wanati remained silent. It had been a very short time since Argudas had split his head with a bullet. We both spent a long time, minutes, or years, in silence. Then I said something, asked something, and Wanati didn't answer. Then I looked up and saw this trace of wetness crossing his face. Celebration of silence /1. It had been years since I had seen Fernando Rodriguez. The wind of exile, which separates so much, has brought us closer. I found it as always, run down, and grumpy. You're just the same, I told him. He told me that he still had a few years left, not many. You don't have to be over 70, because then you become addicted and you don't want to die anymore. That afternoon we let ourselves walk, aimlessly, between the sea and the railway tracks. There in Calila de la Costa, we went slowly, being silent together, and near the station we sat down to have a coffee. Then Fernando commented on the cistern where the soldiers held Raúl Sendic, the Tupamaro, prisoner, and together we evoke Raúl and his way of being. Fernando asked me, "Did you read what the newspapers published when he fell?" The newspapers had reported that he came out of hiding, pistol in hand, opening fire, and shouting, "I am Rufo and I will not surrender." Yes, I told him. I read it. Oh. And you believed it? No. Me neither, said Fernando. This one is silent. Celebration of silence /2. The singer Broilo Lopez, who is half of the duo Los Olomarinos, came to Barcelona. He went into exile. He had a broken hand. Braulio had been imprisoned in the Villa Devoto prison for having carried 3 books, a biography of José Artigas, poems by Antonio Machado and El Petit Prince, by Saint-Exupéry. As they were about to release him, a guard entered his cell and asked, "Are you the guitarist?" And he had stepped on his left hand with his boot. I offered him an interview. This story could be of interest to Triunfo magazine. But Broilo scratched his head, thought for a moment and said, "No." And he explained to me, "This hand in hand will be fixed sooner or later. And then I will play and sing again. Do you understand? I don't want to be suspicious of the applause." Celebration of the human voice /4. Manfred Max Neef, who lived in Uruguay more than 20 years ago, told me what he remembered most, that dogs barked when they sat down and people had a say. Later, the military dictatorship restores order, forcing Uruguayans to lie or be silent. I don't know if the dogs bark standing up, but to have a word was to have nothing. The system /2. The time of the chameleons. No one has taught humanity as much as these humble little animals. It is considered a cult that hides well, reveres the culture of disguise. The double speak of artists of dissimulation is spoken. Double talk, double accounting, double standards, one moral to say, another to do. The moral to do is called realism. The law of reality is the law of power. For reality not to be unreal, officials tell us, morality must be immoral. Celebration of the marriage of words and deeds in an article by a theater writer Arkady Rachkin published in a Moscow magazine. Bureaucratic power, says the author, means that deeds, words and thoughts never meet, deeds stay in the workplace, words in meetings and thoughts on the pillow. A big part of Che Guevara's strength, I think, this mysterious energy, which goes far beyond his death and his mistakes, comes from a very simple fact: he was a rare guy who said what he thought and did what he said. The system /3. Who does not play alive, goes dead. You have to be an asshole or screwed up, a liar or a lie. Time, what do I care, what are you going to do to him, don't mess with him, save who can. The time of cheaters, production does not pay, creation is useless, work is worth nothing. In the Rio de la Plata, the heart is called a fool. And not because he falls in love, we call him a jerk because of his hard work. Praise of private initiative. Jesus is looking at you. Wherever you go, his eyes follow you. Modern technology assists the Son of God in fulfilling his universal monitoring duties. 3 layers of tinted plastic, successively blocking the passage of light, make it easy for you. In 1961 or 1962, one of these slippery-eyed images caught the attention of a journalist. Julio Tacovilla was walking down any street in Buenos Aires when he felt he was being watched. From a stained glass window, Jesus had fixed his eyes on her. He stepped back and Jesus' gaze returned with him. He stopped and the gaze stopped. He advanced and the gaze advanced. This divine sign changed his life and lifted him out of poverty. Soon after, Tacovilla flew to Port-au-Prince and, through his country's embassy in Haiti, secured an audience with President for Life Papa Doc Duvalier. He had a large painting under his arm. "I have something to show you, Excellency," he said. It was a portrait of the dictator. The eyes moved. "Papa Doc is watching you," explained Tacovilla. Papa Doc nodded. "Not bad," he said, pacing in his own image. "How much can you do? How much can you afford? I'll pay you anything." And so Haiti was filled with watchful eyes and the restless reporter was filled with money. The perfect crime. In London, it's like that, the radiators restore heat in exchange for the rooms they receive. And in the dead of winter, there were Latin American exiles shivering with cold, without a single room to turn on the heating in their apartment. They stared at the radiator without blinking. They seemed devout before the totem, in an attitude of adoration, but they were poor castaways pondering how to end the British Empire. If they put in pewter or cardboard coins, the heater would work, but the collector would later find proof of the infamy. What to do, the exiles wondered. The cold made them shiver like malaria. And with that, one of them let out a wild cry, which shook the foundations of Western civilization. And so the piece of ice was born, invented by a poor frozen man. They immediately got to work. They made wax molds, which perfectly reproduced British coins, then they filled the molds with water and put them in the freezer. The pieces of ice left no traces, because they evaporated under the effect of the heat. And so this London apartment became a beach on the Caribbean Sea. Exile. The military dictatorship refused me a passport, like several thousand Uruguayans, and I was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Foreigners Department of the Barcelona police. Occupation. The writer, I wrote, becomes deformed. That day, I gave no more. He was tired of queuing for hours on the street and fed up with bureaucrats whose faces he couldn't even see. These forms are useless. They gave them to me here. When? Last week. Now there are new forms. Can you give them to me? I do not have. And where can I get them? I don't know. Next please. And then there were missing stamps, and no tobacconist was selling these missing stamps, and I had brought 2 photos and there were 3, and the cameras were working with quarters and that day there was not one only neighborhood in the whole city of Barcelona. It was already getting dark when I finally took the train home to Calella de la Costa. I was arrested. As soon as I sat down, I fell asleep. A tap on the shoulder woke me up. I opened my eyes and saw a weird guy, dressed in tattered pajamas. Passport. The madman had cut a piece of filthy newspaper into small pieces, and was distributing the pieces, from car to car, among the passengers of the train. E-passport. E-passport. Chronicle of the City of Buenos Aires. In the middle of 1984, I traveled to the Rio de la Plata. He had disappeared from Montevideo for 11 years, he had been missing from Buenos Aires for 8 years. I left Montevideo because I don't like being in prison, from Buenos Aires, because I don't like being dead. But already in 1984, the Argentine military dictatorship was gone, leaving an indelible trail of blood and dirt in its wake, and the Uruguayan military dictatorship was gone. I had just arrived in Buenos Aires. He hadn't told his friends. I wanted meetings to happen without doing them. A Dutch television journalist, who had accompanied me on the trip, was interviewing me outside the door of what had been my house. The journalist asked me what had become of a painting I had at home, a painting of a port to arrive and not to leave, a port to say hello and not goodbye, and I started talking to him. Respond with eyes fixed on the red camera eye. I told him that I did not know where this painting had ended up, nor where its author, the black Emilio Casablanca, had gone. The painting and Emilio had been lost in the mist, like so many other people and things swallowed up through those years of terror and estrangement. As I spoke, I noticed a shadow walking behind the camera and standing beside it, waiting. When I was done and the red camera eye went out, I shook my head and saw it. In this city of 13 million people, Black Emilio had come to this corner, by pure chance, or as he calls it, and he was in this precise place at this precise moment. We hugged while dancing, and after many hugs, Emilio told me that he had been dreaming that I had been coming back for 2 weeks, night after night, and now he couldn't believe it. And he didn't believe it. That night he phoned me at the hotel and asked if I was sleepy or drunk. Tenderness/1. In Buenos Aires, I looked for the cafe that was my cafe, and I couldn't find it. I looked for the restaurant where I ate caraco in large dishes at any time of the day or night, and it wasn't there either. Where my favorite cantina one, the Bacan, was, there was a pile of rubble. They had raised the Bacan, and with the Bacan they had killed the market where I always went to buy fruit and flowers or for the pure feast of the nose and the eyes. Someone told me that the Bacan had moved, and now it has another place and another name. One evening I stopped in front of the door of this new Bacan no longer called that, doubting, yes, no, wondering if entering would not be a betrayal, when a sudden explosion occurred at the precise moment where I opened the door. The ignition fuses blew the electricity and everything was completely black. I turned and walked away, walking slowly. And so I walked for a while, herding oblivion, looking for places and people I couldn't find, or didn't know how to find, and finally I crossed the river sea, and I entered Uruguay. The Uruguayan generals still had power, already almost gone, already almost goodbye to the time of terror. I entered with my fingers crossed and I was lucky. And walking through the streets of the city where I was born, I recognized her, and I felt that she was coming back without having left Montevideo, which sleeps its eternal siesta on the gentle hills of the coast, indifferent to the wind who beats her and calls her, Montevideo, boring and endearing, which smells of bread in summer and smoke in winter. And I knew that I lacked affection, and that the time had come for the end of exile. After a lot of sea, the salmon swims in search of its river, finds it and goes up, guided by the smell of the waters, to the stream of its origin. So when I went back to Calila to say goodbye, goodbye to Spain, goodbye and thank you, I had a heart attack. Tenderness/2. When the drought arrives and washes away the waters of the Uruguay River, the people of Pueblo Federación return to their lost home. The waters, on emerging, discover a moonscape, and they come back. They now live in a city that is also called Pueblo Federación, as their vice city was called before it was flooded by the Salto Grande Dam and submerged in water. Even the cross at the top of the church tower does not appear from the old town, and the new city is much more comfortable and much more beautiful. But they return to the old town, which the drought returns to them while it lasts. They return and occupy the houses which were their homes and which are now ruins of war. There, where the grandmother died and where the first goal and the first kiss took place, they make a fire for mate and the barbecue, while the dogs dig the earth in search of the bones they had hidden. The weather. The other night, Alejandra Adum tells me, Alma's mother was about to go out. Alma watched her as her mother sat in front of the mirror, painting her lips, shaping her eyebrows, and powdering her face. So the mother tried on one dress, and another, and put on a necklace of black coral, and a comb in her hair, and all about her radiated a clean, fragrant light. Alma never took her eyes off him. "How I wish I was your age," Alma said. "On the other hand, I," smiled the mother, I would give anything to be 4 years old, like you. That night, when she returned, her mother found her awake. Alma squeezed her legs tight. "I'm so sorry for you, Mom," he said sobbing. Resurrection/1. Acute myocardial infarction, death scratch in the center of the chest. I spent 2 weeks in a hospital bed in Barcelona. So I sacrificed my dilapidated Porky 2 diary, which the poor man no longer gave, and whoever does not want him to eat. The change of notebook has become a balance sheet of the years that have passed since the sacrifice of Porky 1. As I passed names, addresses, and phone numbers unique to the new agenda, I also passed through the interplay of eras and people who had just lived, a whirlwind of joys and sorrows, all very, always very, and it was long the mourning of the dead that the dead had remained in the dead zone of my heart, and a longer celebration of the living that set my blood on fire and my heart survived grew. And there was nothing wrong, and there was nothing strange, that my heart would break, using it. The house. 1984 had been a shitty year. Before the heart attack, they had operated on my back, and Helena had lost half a child. When Helena lost the child, the rosebush on the terrace withered. The other plants also died, one after the other, despite the fact that we watered them every day. The house seemed cursed. And yet, Nanny and Alfredo Awerma had been there for a few days, and when they left they had written on the mirror, "In this house we were happy." And we too had found joy in this house now ruined by bad luck, and joy had known how to be more powerful than doubt and better than memory, so this sad house, this cheap and ugly house, in a good neighborhood market and ugly, it was sacred. The loss. Helena dreamed that she was in her childhood, and she saw nothing. Groping in the dark, she called for help, screaming for light, but no one turned on the lamps. In that darkness, she couldn't locate her things, which were scattered all over the house and all over the town, and she was groping for her things in the fence and also looking for cotton or rags or whatever, because that she was losing blood in gushed between them, her legs, a lot of blood, more and more blood, and although she could not see anything, she felt this thick red river which was detached from her body and was lost in darkness. Exorcism. Rosario, the Andalusian witch, had been fighting demons for many years. The worst of the Satans had been his stepfather. This villain had died lying in his bed the night he exclaimed, "I shit on God." And the bronze crucifix fell from the wall and broke his skull. Rosario offered to mislead us. He threw our beautiful Mexican Lucifer mask in the trash and spread a cloud of street smoke, marjoram, and blessed laurel. Then he nailed a horseshoe to the door with the points outward, hung some garlic, and spilled here and there handfuls of salt and a lot of faith. In bad weather, put on a good face, and when you're hungry, guitarrazos, he said. And he said now it's our turn, because luck doesn't help if you don't help him help. Goodbyes. We had been on the Catalan coast for 9 years and were leaving, 2 or 3 days before the end of the exile, when the beach woke up completely covered in snow. The sun lit up the snow and raised a great white fire on the seashore which made the eyes water. It was very rare for it to snow on the beach. I had never seen it, and only an old neighbor in town remembered anything like it from long ago. The sea looked very happy, licking this huge ice, and this joy of the sea and this radiant whiteness were my last images of Calila de la Costa. I wanted to respond to such a beautiful farewell, but nothing came to mind. Nothing to do, nothing to say. I've never been good at goodbyes. Dreams of the end of exile/1. Helena dreamed that she wanted to close the suitcase and could not, and she forced herself with both hands, and put her knees on the suitcase, and sat on it, and stood on it, and there were no cases. The suitcase, which would not be closed, was dripping with things and mysteries. The dreams of the end of exile/2. Helena returned to Buenos Aires, but did not know what language to speak or what money to pay. Standing at the corner of Puritan and Las Heras, I waited for the 60 to pass, not to come, never to come. The dreams of the end of exile/3. his glasses had been broken and his keys had been lost. She groped all over town for the keys, on all fours, and when she finally found them, the keys told her they weren't good enough to open her doors. On /2. It was not a wandering wind, one of those that wander without rhyme or reason, but a gentle gust of wind launched with precision from the distant warm coast to the city of Medellin, through the mountains and the countryside. The wind hits Jenny's house and cuts through it from end to end, the front door swings open, as if kicked by a drunk, and a little later the back door slams open. Opened with the same violence. Then Jenny knew. Calm regained, even the look of doubt, the look of hurt, but she knew. And the laundress, who lived far away, in the town of La Pintada, also knew. She was rinsing clothes with rainwater, that same midnight, when she felt that there was someone behind her. I saw her, my child. I can swear. The news reached Medellin by telegram, early in the morning, but it was no longer necessary. Last night, at midnight, Paula Lopez, the mother of Jenny, a close friend of the laundress, died in the distant city of Guayaquil. Caldwell's last beer. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in April. After a busy week, I was drinking beer in a tavern in Amsterdam. I was with Annelies, who had helped me with holy patience in my meanderings through Holland. I felt good but, I don't know why, on the sad side. And I started talking about Erskine Caldwell novels. It started with a silly joke. As I was embarrassed by my incessant back and forth to the bathroom between beer and beer, it occurred to me to say that the path of beer leads to the toilet like the path of tobacco leads to the ashtray, and I felt very smart. But Annelies, who hadn't read the tobacco trail, wasn't even smiling. So I told him the joke, that it's the worst thing you can do in any circumstance, and that's how I started talking about Caldwell and his scarecrows in the southern United States, and I couldn't stop. It had been more than 20 years since I had spoken of him. I hadn't spoken of Caldwell since the day I met Horacio Petit, in the cafes and canteens of Montevideo, and with him we shared wine and novels. Now, as he spoke, as that unstoppable torrent flowed from my mouth, I saw Caldwell. I saw him under his frayed straw hat, swinging on a veranda, glad for the attacks of moral leagues and literary critics, chewing tobacco and brooding new dirt and misadventures for their wretched characters. And the afternoon turned to night. I don't know how much time I spent talking about Caldwell and drinking beer. The next morning I read the news in the newspapers. Novelist Erskine Caldwell died yesterday at his home in the southern United States. On /3. Helena dreamed that she was talking on the phone with Pilar and Antonio, and she wanted to hug them so much that she managed to bring them from Spain by metro. Pilar and Antonio would slide the phone as if it were a slide, and they would fall, so happy, into our house in Montevideo. Say the wall /4. In the heart of Medellin, the letter with blood enters. And below, signature. Literacy of contract killers. In the Uruguayan town of Melo. Help the police, torture yourself. On a wall in Mazatepe, Nicaragua, shortly after the fall of dictator Somoza. They will die of nostalgia, but they will not return. Longing for the high sky. The Mayans believe that at the beginning of history, when the gods gave birth to us, we humans could see beyond the horizon. Then we were newly founded and the gods threw dust in our eyes so that we weren't so powerful. I thought of this envy of the gods when I learned of the death of my friend René Zavaleta. René, who had a dazzling intelligence, was struck down by brain cancer. Half a century earlier, Enrico Caruso had died of throat cancer. Information. The monkeys confuse the cat Felix with Tarzan, Popeye devours his infallible cans, Berta Singh Erman moans verses at the Solis Theatre, Jean Yol's great scissors cut colds, at any moment Mussolini will invade Ethiopia, the British fleet is concentrated in the Suez Canal. Page after page, day after day, the year 1935 passes through the eyes of Pepe Barrientos at the National Library. Pepe searches for whatever information in the collection of the Uruguayan newspaper, the premiere of a tango or the baptism of a street or something like that, and all the time he feels that it is not the first time, he feels that he has already seen what you see now, that he has already been through here, before he has passed through here, through these pages. The Arlel cinema creates one of Ginger Rogers, in the Artigas the little Shirley Temple dances and sings, a flannel soaked in untisil. Cures a sore throat, a ship burns 150 miles off the coast of Montevideo, a dancer of dubious reputation is murdered at dawn, Mussolini delivers his ultimatum. A war. The war is coming, shouts a huge headline. Yes, Pepe saw it. Yes, yes, this photo, the guard in full dove crossing the page, the ground of the Basque CEA while lowering the hands, these letters, perhaps in childhood, thinks it. He is surprised by such a long journey through memory. In 1935, more than half a century ago, he was 6 years old. And then, suddenly, fear touches him, the icy fingernails of fear brush the back of his neck, and he's sure he has to go, and he's sure he's going to stay. Then go. He could change the day or the year, or he could just start dating, but keep going. Pepe continues, called, he can't leave, he can't stop, and Peñarol wins, with a great gestido figure, and peace has already been signed between Paraguay and Bolivia, but the prisoner problem has not been entirely solved, and a storm sinks ships in the English Channel, and the dancer's murderer falls, who turned out to be her lover and had 8 sous in his pocket at the time of his arrest, and the remedy of Himrod is guaranteed against asthma, and suddenly Pepe Manes, who has just turned the page, freezes, and a photo jumps in his face, a 6-column photo, the overturned and exploded truck, the huge photo of the truck, and around the truck a swarm of onlookers looking at the photographer, looking at Pepe, who does not see them, Pepe eyes blinded by tears in front of the photo of the truck where his father dies, crushed by a spectacular accident which shakes the neighborhood of La Teja, in Montevideo, on September 18 at noon, 1935. The death. If 10 people went to the last recitals of the Spanish poet Blas de Otero. But when Blas de Otero died, several thousand people attended his funeral tribute in a Madrid bullring. He didn't find out. Cry. It was in the jungle, in the Ecuadorian Amazon. The Shuar Indians mourned a dying grandmother. They were crying sitting on the edge of their agony. A witness, coming from other worlds, asked, "Why are they crying in front of her, if she is still alive?" And those who wept answered, "So that she knows that we love her very much." Laughter party. José Luis Castro, the neighborhood carpenter, has a very good hand. The wood, which knows it wants it, remains to be done. José Luis' father had come to the Rio de la Plata from a village in Pontevedra. The son remembers the father, his face flushed under the Panama, the silk tie around the neck of the Celeste pajamas, and always telling hilarious stories. Where he was, the son recalls, laughter broke out. People came from all over to laugh when he told stories, and crowds gathered. At the wakes, the coffin had to be lifted so that everyone could slip into it, and so the dead man stood up to listen with all due respect to these things said with such grace. And of all that José Luis learned from his father, this was the main thing. The important thing is to laugh, the old man taught him and laugh together. The walls say /5. At the Faculty of Economics, Montevideo, drugs produce amnesia and other things I don't remember. In Santiago de Chile, on the banks of the Mapaco River. Blessed are the drunkards, for they will see God twice. In Buenos Aires, in the Flores district. A boobless girlfriend is more than a girlfriend is a friend. The laughter. I'm on the beach in Malibu, on the pier where Detective Philip Marlowe found one of their bodies half a century ago. Jack Miles shows me a pretty house, far away, up high, there lived the man who made Hollywood laugh. 10 years ago, Jack spent time in this house, when the purveyor of laughter decided to leave forever. The house was all covered with laughter. This man had spent his life collecting laughs. Recorder in hand, he had scoured the United States up and down, upside down, looking for laughs, and managed to amass the largest collection in the world. He had recorded the joy of children playing and the exhausted elation of people already experienced. He had laughs from the north and the south, from the east and from the west. As required, he could provide celebratory laughter or pained or panicked laughter, the laughter of lovers, the terrifying horrid cackling and the peals of lunatics, drunks, and criminals. Among his thousands and thousands of recordings, he had laughs to be believed and laughs to be wary of, laughs of blacks, mulattoes, and whites, laughs of poor and rich and mediocrities. Selling laughs, laughs for cinema, radio, and television, he had become rich. But he was a rather melancholy man, and he had a wife who, with just a glance, would make anyone laugh. She and he left their Malibu beach house, never to return. They fled the Mexicans, because in California there are more and more Mexicans who eat spicy food and who have the sacred habit of laughing out loud. Now they live on the island of Tasmanla, there in Australia, but further afield. Me, mutilated hair. Hairdressers humiliate me by charging me half. About 20 years ago, the mirror betrayed the first clarifications under the concealing mane. Today the luminous reflection of my bald head in the stained glass and the windows gives me shivers of horror. Each hair that I lose, each of the last hairs, is a companion that falls, and which before falling had a name, or at least a number. I console myself by remembering the phrase of a pious friend. If hair was important, it would be on the inside of the head, not on the outside. I also console myself by realizing that during all these years I have lost a lot of hair but no idea, which is a joy compared to so many regrets that are walking around. Ceaseless birth celebration. Miguel Marmol poured another round of Matusalem rum and told me he was commemorating, Mirando, 55 years since his execution. In 1932, a squad of soldiers had finished it, on the orders of the dictator Martinez. I'm 82, Miguelito said, but I don't even realize it. I have lots of girlfriends. The doctor prescribed them. She told me she used to wake up before dawn, and as soon as she opened her eyes, she started singing, dancing, and banging, and the neighbors downstairs didn't like it at all. I went to bring him the last volume of Memory of Fire. Miguelito's story functions as the axis of this book, the story of his 11 deaths and his 11 resurrections, throughout his life as a fighter. Since he was first born in Ilopango, El Salvador, Miguelito has been the most apt metaphor for Latin America. Like him, Latin America is dead and born many times. Like him, he continues to be born. But about that, he told me, it is better not to talk. Catholics tell me that everything was by pure providence. And the communists, my comrades, tell me that it was by chance. I proposed that we find together the magic Marxism, half reason, half passion, and a third half mystery. That wouldn't be a bad idea, he told me. Childbirth. 3 days of work and the sun has not come out. It's locked. The little black is locked, said the man. He came from a ranch lost in the fields. And the doctor left. Satchel in hand, under the midday sun, the doctor walked towards the distance, towards solitude, where everything looks like a fucking destiny, and came and saw. Later he said to Gloria Galvin. The woman was on her last legs, but she was still panting and sweating and her eyes were wide. I lacked experience in this sort of thing. I was shaking, I was without criteria. And in there, when I pulled the blanket off, I saw a little arm sticking out between the woman's open legs. The doctor realized that the man was shooting. The little arm was scratched and lifeless, a dirty shred of dried blood, and the doctor thought, there's nothing to be done. And yet, who knows why, she caressed him. He brushed against this inert thing with his index finger, and when he reached for the little hand suddenly closed and squeezed the finger with soul and life. Then the doctor asked to boil some water and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. Resurrection/2. It was the time of the military dictatorship in Brazil. The generals left him to die on their land. Darcy Ribeiro arrived from exile, and an ambulance, which was waiting for him at the foot of the plane, took him directly to the hospital. Darcy knew she had cancer and that the cancer had eaten at least one lung, but she was thrilled with the joy of being in her country and feeling it so alive and dancing. Darcy's brother was from the town of Montes Claros. He came to say goodbye. Sitting next to Darcy in the hospital, he stared at his feet. He was in tears and gloomy, and Darcy was trying to cheer him up. So the surgeon took Darcy by the arm and led him down the hall. "I don't want to discourage you," he said, "but I think you should be prepared for the worst. If your brother makes it out alive, it will be a miracle." Darcy couldn't help laughing, and the doctor didn't understand. The next day they operated on him. Darcy woke up with one lung less. Since he has so many, he didn't even notice. Resurrection/3. I was in Saint-Pierre, in the remains of Saint-Pierre. It had been the most beautiful city in the Caribbean Sea, until a volcano charred its 30,000 inhabitants. Tragic prophecy of a world turned upside down. Those who were safe were damned, and the damned were the only ones saved. Ludger Silberus, imprisoned for being homeless, came out alive, badly burned but alive. 3 days after the disaster, only the thick walls of the prison had been able to resist the fiery torrent of the volcano. It's here. The real, the authentic. The one who escaped from hell. A miracle of God. Take a good look, ladies and gentlemen. And let sensitive people cover their eyes. Silberus has become the great attraction of Cirque Barnum in its wanderings around the world. He was more successful than the bearded woman and the two-headed boy. He opened his arms and slowly spun around, showing his body in a living wound, and the audience shuddered in horror and delight. The three brothers. In Nicaragua, in the years of the war against Somoza, Sofia Montenegro slept badly. His brothers were the subject of his most frequent nightmares. She dreamed of an ambush and a hail of bullets, in nightmares occurring in landscapes out of nowhere or over there on the small hill that goes to Tiscapá. After the last burst, a brother of Sofia, lieutenant colonel of the dictatorship, tore off the scarves that covered the faces of his victims, and among the dead was the other brother. With this brother, the one who fell asleep, Sofia was a member of the Sandinista front. The enemy brother, the lieutenant colonel, had bombarded the town of Esteli and tortured prisoners. But in Sofia's dreams, the two brothers, the soldier and the guerrilla, had her eyes. They were both like her, they were both her. Both heads. Maybe Omar Cabezas is called that because he uses his second head. And perhaps that is why he has reached the end of the difficult path of the Nicaraguan Revolution, and that is why he survived until the end. Omar was a child and played stone wars in the city of Leon. Projectiles were raining down from one street corner to another. When Omar saw a huge stone coming that his enemy had thrown at him, he clearly saw the trajectory of the stone in the air, and he ran. He wanted to run to the other side, to escape, to save himself, but he could not avoid his head being thrown to meet the stone which was intended for him, and his head arrived at the exact place and at the exact moment, to be struck and shattered by the falling rock. Thus Omar lost his head, which sought perdition. Since then, he uses another, a little less crazy. Resurrection/4. He who lies sins, says Escobedo Cardinal, because he steals the truth from words. In 1524, Fray Bobadilla made a big bonfire in the village of Managua and threw native books into the flames. These books were made of deer skin, with images painted in two colors, red and black. They lied to Nicaragua for centuries, when General Sandino chose these colors, without knowing that they were the colors of the ashes of the national memory. The Maromer. Luz Marina Acosta was very young when she discovered the Firalaque circus. The Firalaque circus emerged one night, a magical vessel of lights, from the depths of Lake Nicaragua. The cardboard bugles of the clowns were warrior bugles, and the rags waving high flags announcing the greatest party in the world. The tent was full of patches, and also the lions, the retired lions, but the tent was a castle and the lions were kings of the jungle, and that chubby lady, dazzling in sequins, swinging on the trapeze a yard off the ground, was the queen of the skies. Then Luz Marina decided to become a Maromera. And he really jumped, from very high, and during his first stunt, at the age of 6, he broke his ribs. And so it was, later, life. In war, a long war against the Somoza dictatorship, and in love, always stealing, always breaking his ribs. Because whoever enters the Firelake circus never leaves? Flowers. The Brazilian writer Nelson Rodrigues was doomed to solitude. He had the face of a toad and the tongue of a serpent, and to his ugly prestige and poisonous fame was added the notoriety of his contagious bad luck. The people around him died by bullets, misery, or misfortune. Fatal. One day, Nelson met Eleonora. That day, the day of the discovery, when he saw this woman for the first time, a violent joy came over him and left him speechless. Then he wanted to say one of his brilliant lines, but his legs weakened and his tongue tangled and he couldn't help but stammer little noises. He showered her with flowers. He sent flowers to his apartment, at the top of a tall building in Rio de Janeiro. Every day he sent her a large bouquet of flowers, always different flowers, never repeating colors or scents, and he waited downstairs. From below he could see Eleanor's balcony, and from the balcony she was throwing the flowers in the street every day, and the cars ran them over. And so it was for 50 days. Until one day, one noon, the flowers that Nelson sent did not fall on the street and were not trampled by cars. That afternoon, he went up to the top floor, rang the bell and the door opened. The aunts. Tracy Hill was a kid in a small town in Connecticut, and she was into age-appropriate entertainment, just like any other sweet little angel of God in the state of Connecticut or anywhere else on this planet. One day, together with her classmates, Tracy started throwing lit matches into an anthill. Everyone enjoyed this wholesome recreation for kids very much, but Tracy was struck by something that the others didn't see, or pretended not to see, but which paralyzed her and left a trace in her memory forever. Facing the fire, facing at danger, the ants separated in pairs, and in pairs, tight, tight, they waited for death. Grandmother. Bertha Jensen's grandmother died swearing. She had lived her whole life on tiptoe, as if asking forgiveness for having bothered her, dedicated to the service of her husband and her offspring of 5 children, an exemplary wife, a sacrificial mother, a silent example of virtue. Never a complaint had left his lips, let alone a swear word. When illness knocked her down, she called her husband, sat him up in bed, and started. No one suspected that she knew the vocabulary of this drunken sailor. The agony was long. For more than a month, Grandma vomited from her bed a relentless stream of insults and vulgarity from the underworld. Even his voice had changed. She, who had never smoked or drunk anything other than water or milk, grumbled hoarsely. And so, gasping, he died, and there was a general relief in the family and neighborhood. He died where he was born, in the coastal town of Drager, Denmark. Her name was Inga. She had a pretty gypsy face. He liked to wear red and sail in the sun. Grandfather. A man named Amando, born in a town called Salatra, on the coast of Ecuador, told me the story of his grandfather. The great-great-grandchildren took turns looking after it. The door was locked and chained. Don Segundo Hidalgo said that this is where his ailments came from. I have neutered cat rheumatism, he complained. At the age of 100, Don Segundo takes advantage of any slip, rides bareback and runs away to look for girlfriends there. No one knew so much about women and horses. He had populated this village of Salatra, and the region, since he was a father for the first time, at the age of 13. The grandfather confessed to 300 women, although everyone knew there had been more than 400. But one called Blanquita, had been the most feminine of them all. Blanquita had been dead for 30 years, and he still called her, at dusk. Amando, the grandson, the one who told me the story, hid and spied on the secret ceremony. On the balcony, lit by the last light, the grandfather was opening an old-fashioned tin can, around one of those with pink angels on the lid, and holding the cotton to his nose. "I think I know you," he murmured, inhaling the light perfume of this powder dash. "I think I know you." And swayed very gently, sleepy whispers in the rocking chair. At sunset each day, the grandfather paid homage to the most beloved. And once a week, he betrayed her. He was unfaithful to a fat woman who cooked extremely complicated recipes on television. The grandfather, owner of the first and only television in the town of Salatra, never missed this broadcast. He bathed, shaved, and dressed to the full, as if for a party, the finest hat, patent leather boots, waistcoat with gold buttons, silk tie, and he remained glued to the screen. While the fat woman whipped her creams and raised the ladle, explaining the keys to a unique, exclusive, incomparable flavor, the grandfather winked at her and blew furtive kisses. The bank's passbook was sticking out of the top pocket of the suit. The grandfather put the notebook down, like that, insinuated, carelessly, so that the fat woman could see that he wasn't a poor idiot. Drain. One of these days, Mate Pinero, recently arrived from El Salvador, brought me the news: he is dead. An enemy plane was faster than him. When the attack stopped, his comrades buried him. They buried him at dusk. They all turned their backs. No one showed their face. Fugue had arrived 3 or 4 years earlier, and she was here to stay. He had come in the dawn, in the days of heavy rain, and stood in the middle of the camp, in the rain, and the rain had peppered him, and he was still there. And he was still there when the deluge ceased, a donkey, or the statue of a donkey, already badly beaten and dilapidated, his single eye gazing impassively and forever. The guerrillas expelled him. They insulted him, kicked him, pushed him, and there were no cases. So it stayed. They called him Fuga, because he was the fastest to escape, in the spread of the bombardments. They sent him far, on missions that were hard to get back and forth, and he always came back. The boys moved night and day, back and forth, through the scorched mountains of San Miguel, and he always found them. And when the army surrounded them, Fuga managed to pass, as if nothing had happened, through the minefields, and as if nothing had happened, he crossed the enemy ranks with his saddlebags loaded with coffee and tortillas and cigarettes and bullets. "Do not betray us, Fuga," they asked him. And he looked at them, without batting an eyelid. The donkey knew everything. He knew the bases of operations and the caches of weapons and supplies, the tracks and the shortcuts, the passage chosen for the next ambush, and he also knew the friends of the guerrillas in each of the villages. And something else, much more, everything else, Fuga knew: he was the owner of the confidences. Because the little donkey knew how to listen to the pains and the doubts and the secret banditry of each one, and even the most macho males, silent iron men, allowed themselves to cry with him. Friendship Day/1. In the suburbs of Havana, a friend is called my land or my blood. In Caracas, the friend is my velvet or my key, velvet, for the bakery, the source of good bread for the hunger of the soul, and key for key, by key, Mario Benedetti tells me. And he tells me that when he lived in Buenos Aires, at the time of the terror, he carried on his keychain the keys of 5 other people, 5 keys, of 5 houses, of 5 friends, the keys that have saved. Friendship Day/2. Juan Gelman told me that a lady had fought with an umbrella, on an avenue in Paris, against a whole brigade of municipal employees. The workers were firing pigeons when she got out of an incredible mustachioed Ford, a museum car, the kind that started with a crank, and brandishing his umbrella, he launched the attack. Hitting his way, his vigilante umbrella broke the nets where the pigeons had been trapped. Then, while the pigeons fled in a white riot, the lady threw her umbrella at the workers. The workers only managed to protect themselves, as best they could, with their weapons, and stammered protests that she did not hear. "More respect, madam, please, we are working, these are orders." "Superiors, madam, why don't you hit the mayor? Calm down, madam, what insect bit you? This woman has gone mad." When the indignant lady's arm got tired, and she leaned against a wall to catch her breath, the workers demanded an explanation. After a long silence, she said, "My son is dead." The workers said they were really sorry, but it wasn't their fault. They also said there was a lot to do that morning, you know. "My son is dead," she repeated. And the workers, "Yes, yes, but they earned their bread, that there are millions of free-roaming pigeons all over Paris, that the fucking pigeons are the ruin of the city." Cretins, the lady looked at them. "And far from the workers, far from everything," he said. "My son died and became a dove." The workers were silent and thought for a long time. And finally, pointing to the doves that roamed the skies, rooftops, and sidewalks, they proposed, "Madam, why don't you take your son and let us work in peace?" She straightened her black hat. "Oh no. Otherwise." He looked through the workers, as if they were glass, and said very calmly, "I don't know which of the doves is my son. And if I did, I wouldn't take it either. Because by what right do I have to separate him from his friends?" Gelman. The poet Juan Gelman writes standing on his own ruins, on his dust and his waste. The Argentine military, whose atrocities would have given Hitler an incurable inferiority complex, hit him where it hurts the most. In 1976, her children were kidnapped. They were taken instead. The daughter, Nora, was tortured and released. Their son, Marcelo, and his partner, who was pregnant, were murdered and disappeared. In his place, they took the children because he was not there. How to survive such a tragedy? I say, survive without your soul being extinguished. I have wondered many times over the years. I have often imagined this horrible feeling of usurped life, this nightmare of the father who has the impression of stealing the air he breathes from his son, of the father who wakes up in the middle of the night in a sweat. Didn't kill you, I didn't kill you. And I ask myself, if God exists, why does he pass? He's not an atheist, my God. Art and time. Who are my contemporaries? Asks Juan Gelman. Juan says that he sometimes meets men who smell of fear, in Buenos Aires, in Paris, or elsewhere, and he feels that these men are not his contemporaries. Pero hay un chino que hace miles de años escribió un poema, acerca de un pastor de cabras que está lejísimos de la mujer amada y sin embargo puede escuchar, en medio de la noche, en medio de la nieve, el rumor de sorrow en her hair, and by reading this distant poem, Juan verifies that yes, that they are, that this poet, this pastor, and this woman are his contemporaries. Profession of faith. And, yes, no matter how hurt and screwed up one is, one can always find contemporaries anywhere in time and compatriots anywhere in the world. And each time it happens, and as long as it lasts, we have the chance to feel that we are something in the infinite solitude of the universe, something more than a ridiculous speck of dust, something more than a fleeting moment. Cortázar. With one arm he hugged us both. The arm was very long, as before, but everything else had been greatly reduced, and that's why Helena dreamed of it warily, between believing and not believing. Julio Cortázar explained that he had been able to revive thanks to a Japanese machine, that it was a very good machine but that it was still in the experimental phase, and that by mistake the machine had eclipsed him. Julio said that the emotions of the living reach the dead as if they were letters, and that he wanted to come back to life because of the great pain that his death had given us. Besides, he says, being dead is boring. Julio said he wanted to write a story about it. Chronicle of the City of Montevideo. Julio Cesar Pupo, known as El Hachero, and Alfredo Gravina met at dusk in a cafe in the Villa Dolores district. So, by chance, they discovered that they were neighbors. So close and unknowingly. They offered each other a drink, then another. "You look very good. You won't believe." And they spent a few hours and many drinks talking about crazy times and the price of life, lost friends and vanished places, memories of their youth. You agree? Yes. When the cafe finally closed, Gravina accompanied the hatcher to the door of his house. But later, the axer wanted to reimburse. "I come with you." "Don't bother." There was more. And in this swing they spent the whole night. Sometimes they would stop, because of a sudden memory or because the stability left much to be desired, but immediately they would come back and go from corner to corner, from house to house, from house to house, door to door. Brought and carried by an invisible pendulum, loving each other without saying so and embracing each other without touching. Roasting. At midnight, the coldest night of the year, a sudden and violent order formed. It was the coldest night that year and in many years, and an enemy fog hid everything. Shouting, using rifle butts, the prisoners were placed facing the chain-link fence that surrounded the barracks. From the turrets, searchlights pierced the mist and slowly scanned the long line of gray uniforms, clenched hands, and shaved heads. It was forbidden to turn around. The prisoners heard the sounds of running boots and the sounds of mounting machine guns. Then silence. At that time, a rumor had spread in the prison. "They'll kill us all." Marlo Dufford was one of those inmates, and he was sweating ice. His arms were open, like everyone else, his hands gripping the fence. As he was shaking, the fence was shaking. "I'm shivering with cold," he said to himself, repeating himself, and he didn't believe it. And he was ashamed of his fear. He felt embarrassed by the spectacle he gave to his companions. And he let go of his hands. But the fence continued to shake. Jolted by everyone else's hands, the chain-link fence continued to shake. And then, Marlo understood. Heaven and hell. I arrived at Bluefields, on the Nicaraguan coast, the day after a counterattack. There were many dead and injured. I was in the hospital when one of the survivors of the shooting, a boy, woke up from anesthesia. He woke up without arms, looked at the doctor and asked, "Kill me." I was left with a knot in my stomach. That night, an awful night, the air boiled with heat. I lay down on a terrace, alone, facing the sky. Not far away, the music was playing loudly. Despite the war, despite everything, the town of Bluefields celebrated the traditional festival of Palo de Mayo. The crowd danced happily around the ceremonial tree. But me, lying on the terrace, I wanted neither to listen to the music nor to listen to anything, and I tried not to feel, not to remember, not to think, nothing, nothing at all. And in this I was scared of sounds and sadness and mosquitoes, staring into the high night, when a boy from Bluffy 1DS, whom I didn't know, lay down next to me and started staring at the sky, like me, in silence. Then a shooting star fell. I could have made a wish, but that didn't occur to me. And the boy explained to me. "Do you know why the stars fall? It is God's fault. It is God who strikes them hard. He sticks the stars with rice water." I woke up dancing. Chronicle of the City of Managua. Commander Tomasz Borga invited me to dinner. I did not know him. He was reputed to be the toughest of them all, the most feared. There were other people at dinner, nice people. He spoke little or nothing. He looked at me, measured me. The second time we dined alone. Tomasz was more open. He answered my questions very freely about the old days of the founding of the Sandinista Front. And at midnight, like someone who doesn't want it, he said to me, "Now tell me a movie." I defended myself. I explained to him that I lived in Calila, a small town, where few films came, Old films. Tell me, he insisted, ordered Dash. Any movie, even if it's not new. So I told a comic strip. I said it, I did it, I tried to summarize, but he demanded details. And when finished. Now another one. I counted one of gangsters, which ended badly. Other. I counted one of jeans. Other. I counted, inventing it from start to finish, that of love. I think it was done when I gave up, begged for mercy and fell asleep. I found it within a week. Thomas apologized. I hugged you the other night. It's just that I really love movies, I love them madly, and I can never go to them. I told him that anyone could understand him. He was Minister of the Interior of Nicaragua. In the middle of the war, the enemy didn't give up and there was no time for movies, or luxuries like that. No, he corrected me. Time, I have. Time, you save time, if you want. It's not a time issue. Before, when I was illegal, disguised, I managed to go to the cinema. But now? Do not ask. There was a silence and he continued. I can't go to the cinema because I cry at the cinema. Oh, I told him Dash. Me too. Of course, he told me Dash. I understood immediately. The first time I saw you, I thought, this guy is crying in the cinema. The challenge or they managed to turn us into them, Cacho El Cadre wrote to me. It was already the last days military dictatorships in Argentina and Uruguay, we had eaten the fear of breakfast, the fear of lunch and dinner, the fear, but they had not succeeded in transforming us into them. Celebration of Courage /1. Gabriel Caro, a Colombian, who fought in Nicaragua, tells me that a Swiss fell next to him, annihilated by a burst of machine gun fire, and no one knew his name. It happened on the southern front, a few nights north of the San Juan River, shortly before the defeat of the Somoza dictatorship. Nobody knew the name, nobody knew anything about this blond and quiet militiaman who had gone so far to die for Nicaragua, for the revolution, for the moon. The Swiss fell shouting something that no one understood, he fell shouting, "Long live Bakunin." And while I listen to Gabriel telling me the story of the Swiss, my memory lights up. Years ago in Montevideo, Carlos Benavidez told me about his uncle, or great-uncle, who wrote battle reports during the days of the Gaucho Wars on the Uruguayan prairies. This uncle or great-uncle was walking counting the dead on the bank of the river where a battle had taken place, I don't know what battle. By the color of the headbands, he recognized the sides. And in this he turned over a corpse and was paralyzed. He was a soldier of a few years, he was an angel with sad eyes. On the black hair, red with blood, the white headband said, "For the country and for her." The bullet had entered the word her. Celebration of Courage /2. I asked him if he had seen a firing squad. Yes, I had seen. El Chino Heras had seen a colonel shot at the end of 1960, in the barracks of La Cabana. Many executioners had acted under the Batista dictatorship, evil beasts in the service of pain and death, and this colonel was one of the he was one of the most. We were in my room, in a group of friends, in a hotel in Havana. El Chino recounted that the colonel did not want to be blindfolded and that his last wish had not been a cigarette, the colonel had asked to be allowed to carry out his own execution. The colonel shouted, "Get ready!" And shouted, "Yaim!" When I was going to shout, "Fire!" one of the soldiers jammed the bolt on the gun. Then the colonel interrupted the ceremony. "Calm down," he said, facing the double line of men who were to kill him. They were so close I could almost touch them. "Calm down," he said. "Do not be nervous." And he ordered to prepare the weapons again, and he ordered to aim, and when everything was in order, he ordered to shoot. And fell. El Chino related this death of the colonel, and we remained silent. There were a few of us in the room and we were all silent. Lying like a cat on the bed, there was a girl dressed in red. I don't remember the name. I remind you of the legs. She didn't say anything either. 2 or 3 bottles of rum passed, and in the end everyone fell asleep. She also left. Before leaving, from the half-open door, he looked at Chino, smiled at him and thanked him. "Thank you," he told her. "I didn't know the details. Thank you for telling me." Later, we found out that this colonel was his father. A dignified death is always a good story to tell, even if it's a dignified death for a son of a bitch. But I wanted to write it and I couldn't. Time passed and I forgot. I never heard from the girl again. Celebration of Courage/3. Sergio Fuscovic tells me about the last days of José Toja. "He committed suicide," said General Pinochet. "The government cannot guarantee the immortality of anyone," wrote a journalist from the official press. "I was thin on nerves," General Legui said. The Chilean generals hated him. Toja had been Minister of Defense in the Allende government and knew their secrets. They had him in a concentration camp, on Dawson Island, south of the South. The prisoners were sentenced to forced labor. In the rain, in the mud or in the snow, the prisoners carried stones, erected walls, laid pipes, hammered poles, and laid barbed wire. Toja, who was 1 meter 90, weighed 50 kilos. During the interrogations, he fainted. They interrogated him tied to a chair, blindfolded. When he woke up, he no longer had the strength to speak, but he whispered, "Hey me, officer." It was whispering. Up the poor of the world. He had already been lying in the barracks for some time, when one day he got up. It was the last day he got up. It was very cold, as always, but there was sunshine. Someone brought him a very hot coffee and the black Horcaro whistled at him a Gardel tango, one of those old tangos he loved so much. Her legs were shaking and her knees bent with every step, but Toja was dancing this tango. He danced it with a broom, both equally skinny, the broom and he pressed the broom against his gentleman's face, his eyes very closed, very sensitive, until in a broken turn he fell to the ground and can no longer stand at the top. They never saw him again. Celebration of Courage/4. The small right and the Puritan left devoted much of their fervor to discussing the suicide or not of Salvador Allende. Allende had announced that he would not leave the presidential palace alive. In Latin America, it's the tradition, everyone says so. Later, when the coup occurs, they take the first plane. Many hours of bombs and fires had passed and Allende was still fighting among the rubble. Then he called his closest collaborators, who resisted with him, and said to them, "Come down, I'm coming." They believed him and left, and Allende was left alone in the burning palace. What does it matter which finger fired the last bullet? A secret muscle. At the noon of memory, a noon of exile. I was writing, or reading, or bored, in my house on the coast of Barcelona, when the telephone rang and the telephone brought me, surprisingly, the voice of Fico. Fico had been in prison for over 2 years. He had been released the day before. The plane had taken him from the Buenos Aires cell to London airport. He called me from the airport to ask me to go there, to get on the first plane. "I have a lot to tell you, so many things to tell you, but I just want to tell you one thing next, I want you to know. I regret nothing." And that same night we found ourselves in London. The next day, I took him to the dentist. There was no cure. The electric shocks in the torture chambers had loosened his upper teeth, and those teeth had to be given up as lost. Fico Vogelis was the businessman who financed Crisis magazine, and he not only put money, but he put his soul and his life into this adventure, and he gave me complete freedom to make the magazine as I wanted. While it lasted 3 years and a little, 40 issues, Christ knew how to be an obstinate act of faith in united and creative speech, that which is neither nor claims to be neutral, the human voice which is not neither echo nor ring just to ring. For this crime, For the unpardonable crime of crisis, the Argentine military dictatorship had kidnapped Fico, imprisoned and tortured him, and he had saved her life by a hair's breadth, thanks to the fact that in the middle of the abduction he had managed to shout her name. The magazine had fallen without bending, and we were proud of it. Fico had a bottle of some sort of old French wine. With this wine, we toast, in London, to the health of the past, which has remained a faithful companion. Then, a few years later, the military dictatorship ended. And in 1985, Fico decided that crisis needed to be resurrected. And there he was, again willing to spend time and money, when he found out he had cancer. He consulted various doctors in various countries. Some gave it life until October, others until November. November does not arrive, they are all doomed. He was awful, staggering from operation to operation, but a glint of defiance lit his eyes. Crisis reappeared in April 1986. And the day after Crisis was revived, 6 months beyond all expectations, Fico was left for dead. Another secret muscle. In recent years, Grandma got along very badly with her body. Her body, the body of a tired little spider, refused to follow her. Fortunately, the spirit travels without a ticket, he says. And I was far away, in exile. In Montevideo, Grandma felt the time had come to die. Before he died, he wanted to visit my house. With the body and everything. She arrived by plane, accompanied by my Aunt Emma. She traveled between the clouds, between the waves, convinced that she was on a boat, and when the plane went through a storm, he thought he was driving in a carriage, bumping into the cobblestones. He stayed home for a month. He was eating baby food and stealing candy. In the middle of the night he woke up and wanted to play chess or fight with my grandfather who had been dead for 40 years. Sometimes he would try to escape to the beach, but his legs would get tangled before he reached the stairs. At the end he said, "Now I can die." He told me he wasn't going to die in Spain. She wanted to avoid the bureaucratic hassle, the transfer of bodies and all that. She said that she knew very well that I hated paperwork. And he returned to Montevideo. He visited the whole family, house by house, parent by parent, so that everyone could see that he had come back in the best of ways and that the trip was not to blame. So, less than a week after his arrival, he lay down and died. The children threw her ashes under the tree she had chosen. Sometimes Grandma comes to see me in my dreams. I walk along the edge of a river and it is a fish that accompanies me, sliding, smooth, smooth, through the waters. Celebration. The sun was warm, the air pure and the sky cloudless. Buried in the sand, the clay pot was smoking. On the way from the sea to the mouth, the prawns passed through the hands of Zé Fernando, master of ceremonies, who bathed them in holy water with salt and onions and garlic. There was good wine. Sitting in a circle, friends shared wine and prawns and the sea which opened up, free and luminous, at our feet. While this was happening, this joy was already recalled by memory and dreamed by sleep. She was never going to end, and neither were we, because we are all mortal until the first kiss and the second drink, and everyone knows it, even if they know little. Fingerprints. Oh, I was born and raised under the stars of the Southern Cross. Wherever I go, they follow me. Under the Southern Cross, cross of brilliance, I live the seasons of my luck. I have no God. If he did, I would ask him not to let me reach death, not yet. I have a lot to walk. There are moons I haven't barked yet and suns I haven't caught fire in yet. I have not yet immersed myself in all the seas of this world, which they say are 7 in number, nor in all the rivers of paradise, which they say are 4 in number. In Montevideo, there is a child who explains. I never want to die, because I always want to play. Air and wind. I follow the roads, like the burrito of San Fernando, a little on foot and another little on foot. Sometimes I recognize myself in others. I recognize myself in those who will remain, in the friends in coats, cute lunatics, and beauty flying insects and other lazy and unamused who walk around and will continue there, as the stars of the night and the waves of the night will continue see. So when I recognize myself in them, I am in the air getting to know myself continued in the wind. It seems to me that it was Vallejo, Cesar Vallejo, who said that sometimes the wind changes the air. When I'm gone, the wind will be, it will continue to be. The wind. The wind whistles inside me. I am naked. Owner of nothing, owner of nobody, not even owner of my certainties, I am my face in the wind, against the wind, and I am the wind that hits my face. End. The Book of Hugs. Eduardo Galeano.